Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 821. Victory. Delayed defeat. For the first time in his life, Northern doubted whether he had heard the system correctly. Did it just say, "I slain? Slain? Slain what?" That couldn't be right. And it certainly couldn't be good. What he had come here to do was act as bait, not outright kill the monster. Had he overestimated it? It looked quite strong. I just wanted to make it mad. In his attempt to do so, he had conjured quite the recipe and somehow landed a one-hit kill. It was jaw-dropping, and also appalling. He particularly did not like it. How was he supposed to witness Paragon Rizel's strength if the evil boneless sea had simply died like that? Too easily. Just like that. It was frustrating. Really frustrating. I had great expectations for that bastard. At this rate, Northern didn't know whether to blame the monsters for being defaulted or himself for being the defaulted one. Whichever way, he needed an explanation for this. All around him, the raging waves had begun to settle, collapsing back into the river with an eerie finality, causing another tremendous tsunami to roll forward across the water's surface. But this one was weaker. From the sheer disparity between the two tsunamis, it was clear how devastating that thing called essence manifestation had been. Northern clenched his fists, anger bubbling up again. He had really wanted to see Rizel use it. Sighing, he dove into the torrent's depths, seizing the sinking corpse of the monstrous abomination by one of its hand limbs. More fin than limb. The creature's immense weight almost dragged him back down. But then, several clones materialized. They latched onto the body, pushing it upward, fighting against the thrashing waves despite their crushing force. Moments later, Northern burst from the raging river, shooting into the air. His clones rising alongside him, carrying the evil abomination's lifeless form. Rizel was there, still, suspended in midair, his expression unreadable. His confident front had cracked the moment he sensed the unholy presence vanish. The lingering traces of its manifestation were already crumbling. Something was definitely wrong. But Rizel refused to jump to conclusions. Even if he wanted to, he was too riddled, too baffled. And the only conclusion he could come to seemed impossible. If a sage could defeat not just an ordinary behemoth, but a catastrophic one, then the world would be a far better place. So there was no way in this hellish world, that it was possible. However, Northern remained floating in the air, his clones carrying the lifeless mass of the abomination. And from what he could tell, it was undoubtedly that darned creature that had been controlling the storm. The halo of rotten flesh gripped by one of his sage clones was proof of it. Northern flew toward the Paragon, whose expression was unervingly stiff. His bewilderment carefully suppressed, waiting for a proper explanation. His confident demeanor alone demanded an answer. He wasn't angry. Rather, he was confused. Very confused. "Ral, what is going on?" Northern scratched the back of his head, chuckling sheepishly. "I think I might have killed it by mistake." The Paragon frowned. "You killed it by mistake? A catastrophic behemoth?" Northern gulped. He stayed silent for a moment, then finally admitted, "It seems so." The Paragon didn't say anything at first. Suspended in the air, he simply reached into the pocket of his pants, retrieving a pipe and a strange flame sparker. With a quiet flick, he lit the pot of the pipe, taking a slow drag before tucking the spark device back into his pocket. Then, exhaling a stream of smoke through his mouth and nose, he fixed Northern with a calmly intrigued gaze. "All right, Ral. Please come again." A pause. "What did you say just now?" The situation in the trade city had calmed considerably. Most of the invading monsters, both on river and in the air, had been ruthlessly dealt with, and a cohort of 3 immensely powerful drifters had played a crucial role in turning the tide. The atmosphere buzzed with an unusual exhilaration as drifters dragged carcasses across the port, harvesting cores, slicing off chunks of meat, and passing them along for processing. Today's battle had been their best yet. They had lost only around 30 drifters, with even fewer injured, far better than previous encounters. And it was all thanks to those 3 ferocious forces. Since the start of this long and grueling fight, today had marked their lowest casualties. A real cause for celebration. Yet, beneath the cheerful air, a silent unease lingered. They all knew. Paragon Rizel and some mysterious sage had gone to confront the true catastrophe. For the Paragon to personally accompany someone else into battle, the enemy had to be monstrously powerful. The city held its breath. If the Paragon died, Lithia was doomed. None of them could afford that. They understood how precious, how crucial his existence was to their survival. Hundreds of thousands of lives depended on that single pillar of power. Then, someone pointed to the sky. A dot appeared, growing larger, larger with every passing second. Civilians and drifters alike raised their heads, squinting at the rapidly approaching figure. At first, horror crept into their eyes. But as the figures became clearer, that horror faded. Now they could see them, multiple humans, carrying a colossal, terrifying creature. Then, recognition struck. The Paragon, and another figure beside him. The Paragon had slain the behemoth. Victory was theirs. They would survive. Rizel turned his gaze toward Northern. "Are you sure you don't want credit for this?" His voice was casual, but his jade-green eyes gleamed with curiosity. "If the people knew you did it, you'd be revered." Northern shook his head as they slowly descended. "No, I don't. I'm a social recluse, so I wouldn't even know what to do with all that reverence." He paused, then added, "Instead, I hope you can do something else for me." The Paragon raised a brow. "Oh? What is that?" Northern smiled, tilting his head slightly. "Maybe take me hunting someday?" He paused. "And maybe spare me a few spars?" The Paragon threw his head back and let out a booming, intimidating laugh. "You?" He grinned. "You want to spar with me?" Northern scratched his temple, suddenly feeling a little awkward. After all, Rizel was older. Far older. "Well," Rizel smirked. "There's no problem with that, Ral." He exhaled through his nose, then nodded. "I'll grant you both your wishes." Then his grin stretched wider. "In fact," a glint flashed in his eyes, "I should take you on as a mentee." Chapter 822, Colors of Victory. The sound of victory rippled through the city, dancing with vibrant colors that shimmered against Lithia's dark sky. For the first time in months, since the dawn of their destruction, there was something worth celebrating. None of them had imagined they would survive battling both an apex destroyer and a catastrophic behemoth in a single day. And yet, against all odds, they had. Even more astonishing was the death toll. Less than 100. Not a single civilian had perished. Despite the lingering echoes of devastation, the city pulsed with pure joy. Northern had been assigned a room once everything had settled. As someone who had fought and defeated a behemoth alongside a Paragon, respect naturally followed. People, drifters, looked at him with eyes of envy. Their gazes glittered with awe, the same way they looked at the Paragon. Northern felt submerged beneath their admiration, an undercurrent he couldn't quite ignore. It was a bit irritating to be under such scrutiny, but Paragon Rizel was an insistently persistent man. He had paraded Northern beside him, boasting about his ability to create multiple versions of himself, each one as powerful as the original. Northern never expected the Paragon to be such a big-mouther. Compared to him, even Aster seemed like a novice. But now all of that was behind him. He stood by the window of the makeshift bedroom he had been given, watching over the city. For once, the people didn't look sullen. They acted as if Lithia wouldn't face an even greater catastrophe tomorrow, or perhaps even in the next minute. But Northern knew better. The monsters were still out there, lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting their turn to strike. And then there was the shadow in thrall, a damned nightmare that had escaped his grasp of death. He had no means of tracking it down. Northern frowned, forcing the thought aside. His gaze shifted to the heart of the city, where people feasted like ravenous beasts, tearing into massive chunks of meat. Their usual demureness had vanished. Who cares about being demure when death lurks at every corner? Northern folded his arms, exhaling softly. His eyes landed on Braham, who held a large cup of beer, speaking animatedly with a round-faced man, remarkably well-fed despite the ongoing calamity. Northern had already checked on Roma. Her condition was improving. Her skin had regained its vibrancy, her face no longer pallid. He could tell the nature's essence was truly healing her, working through the wooden coffin she had been encased in. Many others had recovered as well. According to Braham, most of the nearly dead drifters had fully healed and were already up and ready to enter battle. Northern couldn't help but be amazed at the rat's capabilities. Braham was the most resourceful person he had ever met. Still, Northern remained hesitant about copying his talent. He knew that if he copied it and evolved it, it would become incredibly useful. But the issue was, it seemed to benefit others more than it would benefit him. He already had chaos healing him constantly. A separate healing ability was unnecessary. Yet, the sheer brilliance of Braham's talent made it difficult to ignore. Satisfied, Northern had left his spirit linen with Braham. As long as his summon remained there, he didn't need to be present to copy the ability. When the time came, he would simply take the talent and dismiss the summon. That said, he had 2 more months until his penalty was finally over, until he could finally ascend to ephemeral. The past 4 months at the academy had been resourceful. He had mastered blacksmithing to its brim, and had even begun laying the foundation for a construction within the limitless void. In that regard, it was rather fortunate that he had come across How in Lithia. And Elliot, the clone he had assigned to How, had become remarkably useful. People, especially merchants, had grown fond of him amidst the disaster. How had spoken briefly with Northern, describing him as too nice. So much so that it sometimes troubled him to leave the clone on his own. Although Elliot was supremely obedient to How, he was also empathetic. He didn't mind being used as long as he could help others. And Northern remembered, he had once been like that too. That was what had led to his downfall. But at least Elliot, a clone, was immune to things like downfall and demise. Northern might have pitted him otherwise. Aside from his naivety and unnecessary bravado, Elliot had grown into a remarkably intelligent and creative engineer. His knowledge and creativity in the field were astonishing, and he had already taken on several projects. In fact, he had even opened up another avenue for How to monetize. The services Braham had pushed How to offer involved Elliot's skills as an engineer. Even in the midst of disaster, Elliot was constructing a luxurious space for the healer, with other drifters assisting. At first, Northern had been irritated. Braham clearly had his priorities misplaced, but the problem was no one dared to reprimand him for it. Not even Paragon Rizel. Either the man didn't know or he simply didn't care. As for those who did, they sucked up to Braham, too afraid to cross him, lest he decided not to heal them. Everyone desperately sought his favor, and it disgusted Northern. That was why he had already made a promise to himself. One day he would deal with Braham. One day he would strip him of his influence and make him a forsaken wretch. But not today. Not anytime soon. For now, he just wanted to rest his body. Tomorrow could be eventful or uneventful, but regardless, he had another tournament to fight. Then, he would wait for Roma to wake up, give her one final piece, and leave Lithia behind. Northern glanced at the door opposite him, his brows furrowing slightly. There was one more annoying thing he had unwittingly trapped himself into. Steadying his breath, he spoke evenly. "Jessai, I'm quite sure Paragon Rizel offered to provide you with a room. What are you doing standing by the door like that?" The spearwoman stood stoically before shifting ever so slightly, her sleep-deprived eyes finally meeting his. Having been freed from the embrace of your soul at last, I find myself preferring your proximity to anyone else. And please, do not take this the wrong way, my liege. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. If I were to speak plainly, I'd say, standing here like this feels like home. Chapter 823, Recount of the Void Summons. Northern sat on the throne of the Void Palace, leaning on one hand as he observed the dimly lit hall, where the ever-present azure flames danced in their usual silent rhythm. Beyond the flickering fire stood all his summons. Night Terror, Black Mamba, Revunt, Byran, Shard Creeper, Light of Featherstone, and the Plague of Blood. Spirit Linen, the Star's apparel, was absent. It had not participated in the battle within the dungeon either. Northern scrutinized each of them, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He began with Night Terror. The creature's lustrous black carapace bore crude marks, like the remnants of a vicious blade carving into metal armor. The crimson flames within his 4 eyes burned dimmer than usual, a clear sign of fatigue, the slow process of recovery still consuming him. Black Mamba, in contrast, had a body that adapted quickly. No visible wounds marred his form, but his right hand was missing. At the severed stump, flickering black flames danced, licking at the edges as the limb gradually regenerated. His eyes, however, were narrowed into slits, and his face carried a dark grace. Something wicked gleamed in the depths of his soul, reflecting in the glow of his gaze. Northern curled the corner of his lips. I don't know what he's thinking, but I like the look in his eyes. Shifting his attention, Northern studied Revunt. The half-breed tyrant stood unbothered, cold, and without a single blemish. Compared to the others, he did not seem to have suffered any injury at all, or if he had, none that was visible. It's as difficult to read him as ever. Yet, through the mind's eye, Northern could discern most of Revunt's intentions. Not his explicit thoughts, but fragments, traces of intent that flickered at the edges of his awareness. However, it worked in reverse as well. In truth, Northern had no way of knowing if Revunt could explicitly read his mind. The ability had manifested through their bond, an awakening brought about by the half-breed tyrant's synchronization with him. It was the same with Link. Come to think of it, those abilities are categorized differently from my main ones. Could it be because they're tied to my summons? Just like how I maneuvered those copied talents for the Star Chasers. Northern fell silent for a moment, turning the thought over in his mind. Then he shifted his gaze to the next summon. This bastard. Byran, when he first arrived from the battle, was severely injured. Deep gashes covered his body. Yet his regeneration, though a watered-down version of Northern's own, had already mended most of his visible wounds. Unlike his usual jovial self, Byran now wore a straight, solemn expression. Every facet of his demeanor radiated deference. His gaze steady, his posture respectful as he stood before the flames, acknowledging the existence that sat beyond them. Shard Creeper, the goat, was unharmed but noticeably taller, which indicated it had likely ascended to a new void rank. A whisper. Night Terror was an eclipse rank of the void. Black Mamba had reached the level of an emanation. Revunt and Byran remained veils of the void. And now, the void goat had advanced to a whisper as well. Night Terror's superiority in rank also played a role in how overwhelmingly strong, and fundamentally different, he was perceived to be. Northern was satisfied with their growth. It was especially refreshing that they did not require his permission to evolve. As void summons, their strength was their own to claim. And it seemed that the recent battle had left its mark on them. They were growing in ways that exhilarated him, and with how often they had been used lately, Northern was seeing a greater need to actively incorporate them into his plans. Each of them was formidable in their own right. His gaze shifted to the next summon. Light of Featherstone, Siegfried. A figure wrapped in a dark ensemble. His white radiant cloak billowed subtly, like the calming tides of wind. His helmet concealed his face entirely, the narrowed slits revealing nothing of the man within. At his waist, a sword rested in its scabbard. His golden gauntlet-clad hand sat elegantly atop the hilt, his stance regal, exuding unmatched nobility. Light of Featherstone had been far more scathed than he appeared now. Yet his recovery was absurdly short-lived. Even after enduring a brutal battle, he now looked as if he had bathed in some heavenly river, his presence perpetually radiating an almost intimidating level of divine aura. Then, Northern's eyes fell upon the plague of blood Crimson Lord, the tallest among them, a being of flowing blood, his form wrapped in an ethereal crimson robe, a smooth, crown-like helm adorning his head, emanating a menacing level of regality. But Plague of Blood was also among the most gravely injured. Deep lacerations marred the overlapping armor across his torso, and though the crude menace in his gaze still lingered, it was fainter than before. Northern leaned away from the throne's armrest, settling deeper into his seat. It seems the battle was truly brutal. A floor 20 boss monster? It's baffling. What the hell is that place? Byron took a step forward. Of them all, he was the most eccentric, yet he had naturally assumed the role of a leader, and it seemed the Sword King relished it. His voice, steady and brimming with respect, carried through the hall. Master, the monster is an apex destroyer. However, it is empowered by something else. That power is shared among its minions, making them significantly more difficult to handle. Each of them temporarily growing to be apex of destroyers themselves. We were outnumbered and outmatched. Northern leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. How is that even supposed to be possible? The moment they possess power of an apex destroyer, are they not supposed to turn against each other? Not if order is maintained by something far larger and more dangerous. Byron's words stirred something in his mind. It reminded him of what he had witnessed when battling the Floor 10 boss monster. Back then, he had felt it too, that unsettling sensation. The abomination's strength had not been its own. It had been fueled by something else. And if his suspicions were correct. The Crimson Cloud. Chapter 8:24. A Bond. The Crimson Cloud was a grotesque and unsettling existence. Something that had no place in the world. And yet, no one seemed to know of its presence. Even Northern had dismissed it just as one of the wonders of the Central Plains, until he gazed into the abyss, and the abyss gazed back. Thousands of eyes, watching. Northern did not like it. If whatever dwelled within that crimson depth were ever set free, he doubted even his power would be enough to fight it. At least not at his current stage. But he was still a sage. Soon he would become an ascendant, and hopefully Paragon would follow soon after. Yet, despite knowing this, Northern felt no urgency to rush. Instead, he saw purpose in continuing his descent into the dungeon. The most terrifying part of it all, however, was something far more insidious. He was beginning to see Ruffsberger's point of view, and it was starting to look justifiable. But nothing could justify inherent wickedness. No matter what greater good Ruffsberg claimed to serve, abducting hundreds of children and throwing them into the unknown, into death, was an act of evil. Evil in its purest, deepest darkness. And that was the kind of man Ruffsberg was. Northern did not believe in the end justifying the means. No. What nonsense. A convenient lie the wicked told themselves to exist, to justify their actions, to feel less shame. The cruelty Northern had endured. He would return it to Ruffsberg, Paragon or not. But he would not be hypocritical and pretend there was no sense in Ruffsberger's logic. Which was why he would have one hell of a conversation with the man. A conversation indeed. A conversation with his fists. Northern curled the corner of his lips and scoffed. Then, he turned his gaze to his summons and spoke. You've all done well. It gladdens my heart. Rest now. Next time we're all going in together. The varying lights in their eyes burned with the same emotion. Joy. Their lord had spoken. The mere thought of fighting alongside him filled them with exhilaration. Northern sighed, studying each of them. Now, Mr. Fluffy and Corpse Eater. The two had been the most ferocious in the battle. As a result, Mr. Fluffy had suffered a grievous injury, and was now recuperating within Glacier Mountain. And Corpse Eater had withdrawn somewhere within Red Mountain. Northern waved a hand, dismissing them all. Then, rising from his seat, he vanished. His figure materialized within the mountain plain as naturally as the flowing wind. A crevice yawned before him, radiating pure darkness from the outside. Northern stepped forward, bending slightly as he entered. The moment he crossed the threshold, the darkness of the cave ignited with a bloody glow, the red radiance of thousands of rethium crystals he had processed in his short time at the academy. The air felt heavy, saturated with raw energy. Then movement. A creature crawled along the cavern floor before coming to a halt at Northern's feet. It was in an unsightly state. One of its legs was completely gone. The remaining leg was barely intact, but mangled beyond recognition. A massive chunk of its side had been devoured, exposing raw dark flesh and fractured bones. Yet, black flames flickered at the edges of the wounds, burning sluggishly. Its recovery was taking an excruciatingly long time. Seeing Corpse Eater in this condition made Northern fully grasp the true level of the monster they had fought. The drifters of Lithia had just defeated an apex destroyer. Some had died, but in the end they had succeeded, and relatively easily at that. But his summons were stronger than all of them. Northern tried to picture his summons fighting the apex destroyer of the river, and he could easily see them killing it. But then he imagined humans facing hundreds of monsters, each one as powerful as that apex destroyer. Northern shook his head. They'd be eviscerated in seconds. He lowered himself, resting a knee against the ground, and placed a hand on the creature's head. At this moment, Braham's ability would have been invaluable. But that was the thing. They were not human. And beyond that, their bodies were structured less like creatures of flesh and more like extensions of the void itself. Northern patted the monster's head and murmured softly, "I wish you a safe recovery, buddy." He cast one last look around the chamber, then rose, stepping out. In the next instant he vanished. A howling wind tore through the glacier mountain, but its biting cold meant nothing to him. He continued down the frosted slope, the world around him carved in jagged ice and vast, endless snowfields. After several minutes, he reached a massive, open chasm, the entrance to a cavern buried deep within the mountain. Northern stepped inside. For several minutes, he walked through an unlit tunnel, his surroundings illuminated only by the soft, eerie blue glow of ice crystals growing along the walls. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. After a while, he finally reached a cave of abundant crystal minerals. They grew in clusters, scattered like frozen stars across the cavern, their soft luminescence painting the walls in eerie shades of blue and violet. A glowing stream meandered through the cavern's heart, its waters shimmering with ethereal light. Beyond it, Mr. Fluffy lay folded, his massive body rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths, like the shifting of a mountain. His snow-white fur, thick and wild, fluttered faintly with each exhale. Yet, dark stains marred its pristine coat, crimson and obsidian, the residue of battle. A low growl rumbled from his throat as he sensed Northern's approach. Even injured, even at rest, Mr. Fluffy had grown. Larger, still missing a tail, still a devilish beast. As a devilish beast, he could transform into a bipedal monster, gaining tremendous power. But when he ascended to catastrophic beast, he had gained gigantification, a trait only usable while in his four-legged form. And yet, despite his current limitations, he had been exceptional in battle. Northern felt it clearly. Mr. Fluffy was stronger than most monsters of his caliber, and he couldn't wait to see what he would become as an apex beast. For a moment Northern remained still. Then he reached out, running a hand through the beast's massive fur. It was thick, coarse in places, warm despite the cold cavern air. Northern smiled, patted him. This was strange for him, showing emotion. Yet, if he wanted to rely on them, on all of them, then he needed to build something more. A bond. And so, he forced himself to do these things. Because they were his. Chapter 825. There is someone behind the scenes. After finishing with his void summons, Northern did not return to the vicinity of Lithia, at least not in mind. Instead, his consciousness drifted to Verulania, the estate where the students were gathered. By the time he arrived, his clone was already inside, pretending to be asleep. Or was it actually asleep? If Northern commanded it to rest, it probably would. Taking control of his clone, he sat up and glanced out the window. Tonight, the moonlight was especially bright. Both celestial bodies gazed upon him, as if the personification of the stars had borrowed a brilliant pair of goggles to survey the world. A cold wind rushed through the open window, filling the room with an icy bite. He didn't recall closing it. Not since the last time he had stepped out to meet the mercenaries. His thoughts wandered to them. All of them were dead. Except for Roma. Roma, too, would have been dead if not for him. And for what? A small frown settled on his face. He wasn't the type to dwell on others once they were gone. But it seemed the infection that plagued Roma had somehow spread to him as well. With a silent step, Northern leaped through the window, vanishing into the night. His figure blurred across the sky, a streak of motion, before he landed lightly in a familiar place. The shop was just closing down. A tall, slim man, his formal attire slightly disheveled, sleeves rolled up, was locking the double doors. He turned, and upon seeing the figure before him, staggered back. The young man standing in front of him wore a white mask, its foxy-shaped eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I'm glad you remember." Northern's voice was cold, detached, perhaps with a hint of demented glee. The man trembled slightly, forcing a pleased smile. "Oh, young drifter, you have returned. I did not expect you back so soon." His grin widened, but it was strained. He was working hard to sell it. "Returned?" Northern tilted his head slightly. "No, I haven't returned yet." He stepped forward, his blue eyes gleaming wickedly beneath the mask. "But I did reach Lithia, with the soul essence stimulants you gave me." Northern leaned in closer, his voice lowering. "Isn't that surprising?" The man's eyes widened, just for a moment, before he quickly schooled his expression. He grinned again, but anxiety was already pulling at the corners of his features, twisting them unnaturally. "As surprising? No, not at all," he stammered. "I had so much hope in you, young drifter. I needed you." Northern's hand shot forward, seizing the man's throat. His grip tightened. Slowly, he lifted him off the ground. The man gasped, clawing at Northern's wrist, his legs shaking as his face drained of color. Northern's voice was different now, colder, sharper, dangerous. "Do you think I'm playing games with you?" he murmured. "What were you thinking? You sent me to a place where death was certain. Even if I entered, you knew I wouldn't be able to leave." The man's fingers dug into Northern's arm, but it was useless. His vision blurred, black edges creeping in as his throat constricted. Then suddenly Northern released him. The man collapsed in a heap, gasping, coughing violently at his feet. Northern watched him with quiet disdain. "I'm listening," he said darkly. "Weave me a tale of absurdity, the best you can find." The man, still panting, looked up at him. His breath came in ragged bursts, his lungs trying to catch up with his fear. After a few moments, he managed to steady himself. "I swear, sir, it is not a tale," he rasped. "Nor is it absurd." Northern remained still, impassive. The shopkeeper swallowed hard, feeling his face on the verge of breaking apart. "The stimulants, they were very important," he said. "I told you, I'm a broker. Someone offered me a certain prize to ensure they reached Lithia." His voice steadied slightly as he continued. "The man came with the goods. He told me what was inside them. He explained their importance, and he enlightened me about the blockade." He exhaled shakily. "And he insisted," the shopkeeper added, voice lowering, "that I make sure everyone joined the caravan, especially those who were too curious about the blockade." Northern shifted slightly. The cold light in his eyes gleamed brighter, and the air around the shopkeeper thickened with an unnatural chill. It wasn't the winter night's wind. This coldness felt like it could tear him apart. Within his mind, Northern's thoughts bubbled, his pupils subtly dilating. Someone knew he would approach. Someone had anticipated his movements but had chosen not to give the shopkeeper all the details. His gaze darkened as he focused on the trembling man before him. "And how many people came to you, curious about the blockade?" The shopkeeper hesitated, glancing at Northern very briefly before averting his gaze. It wasn't his words that answered Northern. It was his silence. "Me only." The shopkeeper shuddered. "I found it strange when you came inquiring, but at the same time, I was compelled to do as he said, to report to him." Northern materialized the illusioned hefter. Without hesitation, he drove the blade into the shopkeeper's hand, the steel sliding effortlessly through his muscles. A muffled, guttural groan escaped the man's lips as he writhed beneath him. Pain shot through every fiber of his being, but Northern's voice cut through it with eerie calm. "So, who is this person?" He knew the weight of this question. That was why he accompanied it with suffering, so the man would understand. Killing him would be too easy. And from the way the shopkeeper's body convulsed, the message had been received. His entire arm trembled as agony surged through him. He gritted his teeth, suppressing another cry, and forced his lips to move. "The man," he called himself. The words stalled. The shopkeeper's expression twisted. His focus lost, as though he was reaching into an lightless plane of thought to grasp something that had never been there. For a brief moment, the name had been at the edge of his memory. But now, as he tried to say it, it was gone. Northern's eyes narrowed. He called himself what? The man swallowed thickly, sweat beading on his forehead. He called himself. His voice faded. Again, nothing. Northern watched him closely. Not just his face, but his soul. And that was why he knew this wasn't an act. The man genuinely could not remember. What did his face look like? The shopkeeper frowned slightly, his gaze lowering as he struggled to recall. But it was the same. No worse. Not only could he not remember, it felt as though he had never known at all. Chapter 8:26. A Single Wish. Northern was silent for a few moments. The weight of his stillness pressed down on the air like an imminent annihilation. Seeing it, the shopkeeper nearly broke out of his skin. He scrambled forward, groveling at Northern's feet. "I swear, I'm not lying. I'm not trying to trick you," he cried. "It was right there. I had it on my tongue. I swear it just left." His usual assured tone had crumbled into shameless desperation. Northern cast an indifferent glance at him, then sighed, stepping back and pulling his foot away from the man's grasp. Straightening, he looked down at him again and asked, "I presume your claim of having reached the northern continent was a fluke, something to enthrall me." The shopkeeper's head jerked up. "What? No. Not at all, Sir Drifter. I swear it wasn't." His words spilled out quickly, frantic. "It was why that person knew to come and meet me. I am one of the very few information brokers with contacts all across the world." He risked another glance at Northern, then added, voice dripping with desperation, "If you take me under your wing, I can serve you. Please just don't kill me. I will give you whatever information you need." Northern studied him. For the first time, there was a flicker of intrigue in his gaze. Beneath the mask he grinned. "Oh, of course you will serve me." His voice was amused, yet chilling. "That was, after all, the reward I was supposed to receive for delivering your caravan to Lithia and returning, wasn't it?" His gaze sharpened. "So yes, you will serve me, and you will tell me everything I need to know about the blockade." The information broker swallowed hard. Fear glimmered in his eyes as they met Northern's. "Yes, sir. I will tell you everything I know." Northern nodded. Extending a single finger, he traced a slow, deliberate circle in the air. A rift tore open before them, slashing through the darkness with eerie brilliance. The shopkeeper recoiled, his body trembling. He had no words for what he was witnessing, only a raw, unexplainable fear clawing at his insides. Before he could process it, Northern grabbed him and stepped into the rift. The spatial tear sealed behind them instantly, leaving no trace. The shopkeeper staggered, disoriented. The scenery had changed entirely. Darkness stretched in all directions, vast and suffocating like a shroud. Colossal pillars loomed around them, vanishing into a ceiling that was too far above, if a ceiling even existed at all. It was as if these pillars anchored certain parts of the darkness, preventing it from collapsing. Yet despite the oppressive blackness, strange azure lights flickered and danced in the distance, casting both a regal warmth and a bone-chilling cold over the air. The shopkeeper shuddered as unseen pressures crashed over him. A wave of emotions, foreign, overwhelming, slammed into him. His mind couldn't comprehend where he was standing. Northern paced in front of him, moving back and forth in a short, linear stride. Then finally he stopped. His azure gaze pierced through the man's trembling form. "Now," Northern said, his voice quiet, unwavering. "Go on. Tell me everything about the blockade." The shopkeeper trembled, his entire body barely holding together beneath the weight of Northern's gaze. It was the look of a predator, sharp, unrelenting, ready to rip him apart at the slightest provocation. But that look demanded answers. There was no escaping this. He had to start talking. He swallowed hard, fear not only in his eyes but woven into the very tremor of his voice. "The blockade. It's more than what it appears to be," he began, his words quivering. "On the surface, it looks like a push to awaken the nations, to force them to see that the military is serious about the revolution." He paused, inhaling shakily. "But in truth, that's not the goal. In fact, the nations remaining oblivious and skeptical works to the military's advantage. That's what I was told." He hesitated. "The one leading this entire operation, I hear he's a rogue from the government. A paragon." Northern's eyes narrowed. "And?" The shopkeeper licked his dry lips. "I also heard that not only is he a paragon, but he has 6 ascendants following him. Each one of them commands a cohort of 4 sages." Northern's gaze sharpened. "What did you just say?" The shopkeeper flinched and stammered. "I said." "No. I heard what you said." Northern cut him off. "That was rhetorical." The shopkeeper swallowed hard, but Northern was already lost in thought. 4 sages? Under each ascendant? And 6 ascendants? That kind of force was overwhelming. Even he wasn't sure he could handle all of them, at least not without his summons. Maybe with my clones. Even then it would be tough. For others it would be impossible. But if this paragon, whom Northern had a very good idea of, was planning to push the ascendants into paragons and sages into ascendants, creating a chain of command, then the scale of destruction would be catastrophic. The Central Plains had no idea what was coming for it. That damn Dante. He really thought this through, didn't he? Northern exhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts. Then he glanced back at the shopkeeper. "Well, go on." The man continued, his body trembling, whether from the pain in his hand or the sheer terror of the being standing before him. Or perhaps both. "I hear he's using this time to grow his forces," the shopkeeper stammered. "I hear he's won the hearts of the military, and even those in the government who oppose him. They're powerless. Completely powerless." His voice quivered, nearly breaking. "That's why he's begun a purging. Right now, the government is a silent mess. The higher-ups are dying, and the only person who cares enough to stop him, the only one who would dare stand against the paragon, is trapped in Lithia." Northern's eyes widened in realization. Paragon Rizel. The paragon had been right all along. The blockade was designed to hold him back. But now Northern saw the full picture. Dante did perceive him as a threat, but not an undefeatable one. He was pinning the paragon down in Lithia to ensure no one could interfere while he purged the government. And what happens once he's done? The answer was chilling. He would unleash the full force of the monsters and crush Lithia. Even Paragon Rizel might not be able to save the city. Not against hundreds, perhaps thousands, of monsters lurking at the edge of the horizon, waiting for the final command. Northern exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. Everything had scaled up in an instant. The weight of it, the sheer level of devastation, it was finally settling in. And yet, he owed the very paragon orchestrating this destruction a single wish. His face drained of color. Damn! Chapter 827, Social Recluse. Byron. Yes, my master. The gaunt, white-haired man materialized as if he had been waiting his entire existence for Northern's call. As if every crawling, flying second of his life had been spent in endless anticipation. He was even smiling. Shaking off Byron's smug grin from his thoughts, Northern glanced at the shopkeeper before turning back to Byron. This man has promised me his loyalty, but of course I can't trust him. So, I want you to break him, reshape him in such a way that he understands he has only one choice, to be my servant. If he so much as thinks of doing otherwise, he should come to know that there exists a fate far worse than death. The shopkeeper's face lost all color as Northern's words sank into his bones. His gaze darted toward the strangely approachable yet inexplicably foreboding man before him. Byron looked as though he were suppressing something unfathomably malignant beneath his skin, something coiled and waiting. Northern turned back to the trembling shopkeeper, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. "We will meet again soon." The shopkeeper tried to speak, but his words tumbled over themselves, refusing to escape his mouth. Byron, meanwhile, was already grinning at him, his piercing blue eyes glinting with something that looked disturbingly close to enjoyment. The shopkeeper had no idea what was unfolding, but he feared, greatly. His heart slammed wildly against his ribs. Northern disappeared from the limitless void, leaving the two of them alone. Back in his room, Northern lay down to steal a few hours of rest. Even if his consciousness was in the body of a clone, sleep functioned the same way regardless. But the peace did not last long. A deafening clang shattered the estate's stillness, the estate bell, ringing loud enough to scrape against the bones of dawn. Students were already moving through the halls, many heading toward breakfast. Their conversations were a buzz of lingering excitement from yesterday's battles. Almost every fight had been exhilarating, but one, in particular, had left jaws unhinged. A certain student had demonstrated an overwhelming level of power, enough to make people question if even the student council president could stand against him. But after witnessing the council president's own battle, that question had become even harder to answer. Northern had accessed the memory the moment he entered his clone, and it was exactly as he had suspected. The student council president, for someone of her caliber, was formidable. But the most striking thing? She had fought without even using her talent ability. And yet, alone, she had crushed 3 opponents. Northern was beyond impressed. As for whether she could defeat him, he scoffed to himself. He was out here killing behemoths by accident. Maybe I should stop pretending I don't know exactly what I am. Northern sighed and stepped into the bathroom. A few moments later, he emerged, feeling refreshed, his damp hair clinging to his forehead. Since this was just a clone, certain abilities of advanced cloning allowed him to replicate items along with his body, an ability he had obtained long ago. Most abilities didn't stay distinct forever. The system had a way of either integrating them into his body or absorbing them into the passiveness of his abilities. For instance, when he created a clone, it automatically duplicated whatever he was wearing. Initially, this ability had limitations, but after acquiring the skill to clone objects, those restrictions had vanished. Yet, over time, that ability had been absorbed into his clones, meaning he could no longer individually clone objects anymore. If he looked at it introspectively, it almost felt like the system itself was restricting him in subtle ways. And yet, at the same time, it was granting him do-it-yourself capabilities and other remarkable quirks, powers that had made his current level of strength even possible. Still, Northern couldn't shake the wariness he felt toward the system, and toward void and chaos. Whatever he planned to do, he knew he had to keep suppressing them. But that didn't mean he was without his own schemes. He just couldn't let those entities peek into them. His uniform materialized seamlessly onto his body. After ruffling his hair a bit more to dry it, Northern stepped out of his room, entering the hallway and making his way toward the dining hall. This is strange. He glanced around. He had never realized that this many non-combative students lived in this hall, or that so many of them had actually participated in the contest. Normally, students were free to wear whatever they wanted, and it was mostly the combative students who stuck to their uniforms. But today, the non-combative students were wearing their academy uniforms with a sense of pride. It was unexpected. Northern stood in front of the server, holding his empty tray. The woman behind the counter suddenly smiled at him. "There's a special meal for you today. Please set your tray down, student." Northern tilted his head slightly, his eyes questioning, but he obeyed, placing the tray down. The woman reached under the counter and pulled out an already prepared and packaged meal. Each side dish had been delicately arranged around the main dish, a mound of mashed rice. Then she placed another tray on top of it, filled with expertly sterilized steaks, glistening under the light. At the slightest movement, seasoned sauce and oil dripped enticingly from the meat. She smiled at him once again. "I'm a cooking instructor from the non-combative school," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "You made us proud, boy. From now on, I'll personally prepare and serve your meals for the rest of this contest." Her eyes shone with something fierce: hope, admiration, expectation. "This might seem like a lot to ask, but please, win this contest for us." Northern froze for a moment. It felt odd, slightly good, but odd. The preferential treatment was nice, it was a comfortable luxury. But the hope in her eyes, he didn't like being looked at like that, like he was some kind of hero. Yet lately, it seemed that what he didn't like was exactly what was happening to him. "They're misunderstanding me. I am not a good person." Still, he bowed slightly, forcing a small smile. He hesitated for just a moment before finally muttering, "Thank you." Then he turned and walked away, quickly, his face suddenly feeling hot. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! I really need to socialize more." Chapter 8:28. Disastrous. Northern settled at his table, carefully unpacking both food trays. Yet, no matter how much he tried to ignore them, the stares remained, dagger-sharp, unwavering. The weight of those gazes pressed against him, suffocating. It was as if the ground beneath his feet had pulled away, leaving him suspended in the air, exposed. Even the floor itself felt like it was watching him. And then, before he could fully grasp the situation, students in black uniforms began surrounding him. One after another, they took seats at his table, murmuring in hushed voices, strange lights flickering in their eyes. Northern sighed and dipped his head slightly. "What the hell is going on? Is this some twisted consequence of my damn performance?" A strong urge to sink into the ground shot through him. Maybe he should just use shadow step and vanish, retreat to the comfort of his room where he could eat in peace. But would that just make things worse? Should I just do it? The idea was tempting. He really wanted to do it. But at the same time, he couldn't keep running away forever. Could he? If he wanted to grow, if he had to grow, then he needed to learn how to hold a normal conversation without either making it awkward or immediately wanting to escape. Maybe this was a necessary step. Swallowing hard, Northern forced himself to focus on the meal before him. With slow, deliberate movements, he unwrapped the gleaming silver utensils and took the spoon into his hand. He scooped up a spoonful of rice, dipped it into the soup sauce, and brought it to his mouth, his hand trembling slightly. Only now did he realize just how much he despised attention. He had never received this much of it before. The reverence, the admiration, the silent expectation gleaming in their eyes. It all felt wrong, like it wasn't meant for him, like he was sitting in someone else's seat. Imposter syndrome? Is that what this is called? Or was it something else? Fraudulent perception? Delusions of grandeur? Wait. No, that's the opposite. What the hell was it again? His thoughts spiraled, unraveling into a chaotic mess, his mind threatening to split under the pressure of too many people watching him. He was thinking too much, doing too much. Damn it, Just focus on the food before you start thinking the food is staring at you too. Finally managing to push past the oppressive storm of thoughts crashing through his mind, Northern found a sliver of peace. Still, a question lingered at the back of his mind. Where is that chatterbox and his Starchaser friends? He assumed their presence wouldn't change much, but even a subtle distraction would have helped. Then again, it almost felt like they were intentionally absent, as if they had predicted this exact situation. After all, they spent more time among the students than his clone did. His clone hardly interacted. It mostly just stayed indoors. Northern exhaled sharply and continued eating. But his moment of peace was painfully short-lived. A familiar figure approached, moving through the dining hall with a deliberate stride. Dark skin, violet eyes, an undeniable air of confidence. Northern frowned. What is he doing here? Kalen reached the table, his gaze flicking to the non-combative student beside Northern, the light in his eyes kind yet unsettlingly sharp. Please, can you make way for me? I'd like to talk to my friend here. Kalen was wearing a standard white tracksuit with black straps, recognized immediately as a training kit from the combative school. But he didn't need the outfit to be recognized. His presence alone was enough. His unique skin tone, his family's unwavering prestige, the mystical allure that clung to him like a second skin. It all demanded respect. The student gulped, his eyes widening in silent reverence, his expression practically screaming, "He spoke to me!" Kalen smiled. So, what do you say? The student nodded frantically, fumbling to gather his food before clumsily vacating the seat. Kalen took the spot with casual ease, leaning one elbow on the table, resting his cheek against his hand. And then he stared. Northern tried to ignore it, focused on his meal. But soon, he felt like he wasn't eating the food anymore, like the food was eating him. He gritted his teeth, dropped the spoon, grabbed a bottle of water, and drank until it was half empty. Then, with deliberate patience, he turned to face Kalen and asked evenly, "How can I help you?" Kalen's smile widened, becoming almost pleasant. "I like you." Northern blinked. Then he leaned back slightly, frowning. I see." He placed his hands on the table and sighed. "I've been told on several occasions how handsome I am, so I suppose it makes sense that you'd mistake me for that kind of person. Actually, I haven't really come out of the closet yet, but I can assure you," he exhaled dramatically, "I don't like you, and I never will. In fact, if we're being pragmatic, I think I'd have a higher tendency to like your sister rather than you. But then again, she's quite lacking in some important areas." Silence. Northern immediately froze. Damn. I knew it. I shouldn't have opened my mouth. It was as if the sheer weight of his previous overthinking had compressed into this very moment, squeezing words out of his mouth with zero time for him to process them. There had to be a term for this. Condition. Some kind of medical phenomenon? Mental? The chaos flames guards my mind. I can't be mentally assaulted. So then what the hell is this? Meanwhile, Kalen was staring at him. His eyes were wide. His small, amused smile had frozen. A moment later, a pearl of laughter burst from Kalen's mouth. Light, amused, genuinely entertained. He leaned back so suddenly that he nearly toppled from his seat, his body shaking from the force of his laughter. Northern, however, was not finding any of this amusing. His expression remained flat, his mind chaotic. Not only had he said way too much, but that last statement, what the hell was that about? And, wait, why the hell had he lied about people calling him handsome? No one had ever said that. Not once. What exactly is wrong with me this morning? Frustration bubbled under his skin, and a singular, unfiltered thought rang through his mind. People. People. I really hate people. They mess me the hell up. Chapter 829 Chalice and Breeches. Northern sat composed, carefully bringing a spoonful of rice to his mouth as the Kijar Scion let loose an annoyingly pleasant laugh. Finally, the young man's pearly laughter slowed, tapering off into short, breathy giggles. He lowered his head onto the table for a moment, trying to catch his breath. Oh, really? You're quite funny. That was so unexpected in many ways. He chuckled a bit more before continuing. And what was that? Not that kind of person. You haven't really come out of the closet yet? Your phrasing is difficult to piece together. His chuckling receded into an amused sigh. And I wasn't even talking about liking you in that way. Oh, dear stars, you have it all completely wrong. I don't roll that way. In fact, I have a childish crush I've refused to get over, even 10 years later. Quite unbelievable for someone of my caliber. Right? Northern spared him a glance, idly chewing his food, then looked away. Not quite. Kalen sat upright, exuding a casual coolness. He looked smashable in more places than just his face. Despite his odd skin tone, Northern had to admit he was flawlessly handsome. His smile was particularly dangerous, making girls trip, literally, right onto their faces, falling headfirst into a well of infatuation. But beneath that resplendent visage, Northern saw something else. A child. One that clung to childhood promises, memories, and longing. What a strange guy. If he were the one blessed with such unfairly perfect features, he'd be pulling girls by the dozens. Well, granted, most of them would be below his age range, and he had a million other things to do besides wasting time on emotions. What things? Like defeating Ruffsburg, for example. Northern nodded to himself. Right. I do have a million things to do. Kalen, meanwhile, leaned in closer, tilting his head with a teasing glint in his eyes. So, you happen to say you're more likely to like my sister, but since she's built like a rod, rather featureless, you find no interest in her. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. That would mean you're a man who fancies overflowing chalices and massive britches. Northern almost choked on his food. He coughed violently, reaching for his cup and downing the rest of his water in one desperate gulp. If not for the fact that he had read daily newsletters religiously as a child, those words wouldn't have registered so vividly in his mind, with such sharp imagery and precision. Now he felt a little embarrassed, but he suppressed the feeling and fixed Kalen with a serious gaze before things spiraled out of hand. Aren't scions of nobility such as yourself usually neatly taught? Kalen looked at him for a second before throwing his head back with a short laugh. Bah! Scions of nobility neatly taught? I'm afraid I must disappoint you. Scions of nobility have so much privilege that they tend to turn out rather promiscuous. Sometimes, too promiscuous. Northern tilted his head slightly. That actually made a lot of sense. He had always assumed nobles were relentlessly trained, given access to every resource imaginable, preparing them for the sheer difficulty of surviving rifts. But he had failed to consider the sheer pomp of those who lived in the lap of luxury. The ones who took all their privileges for granted, indulging in stupidity simply because they could. Easy. It's just human nature. Why am I acting like they're out here killing each other? No matter how promiscuous they were, it was none of his concern. Still, it was a bit irritating. Even in my past life, I only experienced such a thing on my wedding night. And even then, it was short-lived. He paused, frowning. Although my wife at the time did claim I put it in the wrong place. Remembering how treacherous that said wife had turned out to be, Northern suddenly doubted her words entirely. He shook his head, pushing away the desperate urge to piece together the fragmented, vague memory. Some things were better left forgotten. Meanwhile, Kalen leaned in again, eyes gleaming with the zeal of a deranged prophet. Rian, my good and tragically misguided friend, you are wasting your youth in the worst way imaginable. Northern barely glanced up from his meal. I don't recall asking for a sermon. Kalen ignored him already mid-ramble. You claim you're not interested in my sister because, in your words, she's built like a rod, featureless. An empty scroll yet to be penned upon by the grand calligraphy of womanhood. Northern sighed. I never said it like that. Kalen waved his hand dismissively. The essence remains. Which leads me to my point. You, my dear Rian, require a woman of substance. Northern stopped chewing, now mildly wary. I real hope you won't elaborate on that. Kalen smirked. Oh, but I must. You see, a woman with an overflowing chalice is a woman who carries the generosity of the stars within her very form. The constellations, in their boundless wisdom, have sculpted such women with abundance. An excess of beauty, a divine curvature that defies mortal engineering. Do you not see? These are women imbued with divine physics, a gravitational force that demands reverence. Kalen gasped, scandalized. Suggesting? No, I am declaring. Why else do poets compare them to moons? Why speak of pillows of paradise? Even history agrees. Do you think conquerors fought wars for mere territory? No, my friend. They sought the chalices. Northern massaged his temples. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Kalen wasn't finished. And let's not forget the massive breeches. Have you ever seen a woman with hips so wide they look like they could carry the burdens of an empire? Those Northern are pillars of civilization. A woman with the right proportions can shift the very balance of power. Do you think it's a coincidence that history's most cunning queens were also sculpted like embodiment of effeminate stars? Northern exhaled slowly. So, in short, you're telling me that the fate of nations is decided by meaningless things? Kalen nodded gravely. Yes, and you, my friend, are spitting in the face of destiny by refusing them. Northern stared at him, completely deadpan. I train every day to kill rift-born abominations. And this is the battle you want me to fight? Kalen grinned. Hey, don't underestimate the gravity of this. It is important. It is destiny. A battle of willpower, my friend. I saw your level of strength in the contest. You have the power to accept this gift of nature. So tell me, will you embrace it? Or will you remain an unplucked fruit upon the barren tree of loneliness? Northern picked up his bottle and took a long, slow sip, contemplating the chain of decisions that had led him to this moment. Then, finally, he sighed. I should have just slept in Lithia. Chapter 830. Be careful what you wish for. Northern took a deep breath and exhaled sharply. Everything was gone. His appetite, his will to eat, and before him lay the potential of a supreme delicacy, an unfathomable feast of the gods. If not for this, whatever in the shell of a noble scion had decided to interrupt him. He inhaled sharply again, fixing a glare on Kalen as he exhaled, this time with deliberate control. So, in the end, the reason why you are here is because of your curiosity, isn't it? Kalen froze, blinking at Northern as if he'd been caught stealing from a divine pantry. Then he let out a wild, suspicious laugh, one that was jagged, unhinged, and maybe, just maybe, meant to cover something else. Sadly for him, Northern saw through that flimsy shield effortlessly. What? Curiosity? What kind of flimsy excuse? I'm talking about the next shape of history here. Yes, you could be the crux of an entire civilization to come. A living keystone, the bridge between what is and what should be. And all you have to do is take it. It's free. Nature's gift. Just reach out, seize it, sink your teeth in, devour it whole. His fist clenched as if he could physically grasp the abstract notion he just conjured. The last 3 words cracked like a whip from his mouth, his eyes burning with a manic spark of resolve. Northern looked at him with a sincerely disturbed frown. Then he sighed and shook his head. Don't worry about all that. Just get to the point, Kalen. What do you actually want? Kalen exhaled heavily, leaning back in his chair with a dramatic slump, like an actor who'd just been booed off stage. What a boring stick you are. He clicked his tongue and raised an eyebrow, smirking. You're insane. The entire school is going absolutely bonkers over you. And not the fun kind of bonkers, no, I mean full-on lunacy. As if clearing a rift in a day wasn't already an obscene flex, you just had to go and annihilate Euron. Euron, of all people. Euron. Northern tilted his head slightly. Who is that? Kalen blinked, stared, then threw his hands up. The name of the guy you turned into a public spectacle. Really? You don't even know his name. The Prince of Insects. Northern nodded slightly, nonchalant. Oh, I see now. He's another noble scion like you, isn't he? Kalen shook his head, a half-smile stretching across his lips. I don't understand you. You don't know Euron Paracuy. Do you at least know the southern kingdom of Paracuy? Northern hesitated for a moment before answering evenly. The Central Plains have so many countries jammed together it's impossible to remember all of them. I know a few, though. Take Verulania, for example. And there's Riem Guard. Kalen folded his arms. Who doesn't know Riem Guard? He sighed, then leaned forward, gesturing vaguely as he explained. Paracuy, they call it the city of insects. And Euron? He's its crown prince. A guy with a freakish connection to insect-type monsters, taming them like they're nothing. But it's more than just that. There's a nuance to his ability, something none of us can quite crack. It's not just control. People lose themselves when they go against him. Their will gets chewed up, digested, and spat back out as nothing more than submission. It's unsettling. And that is why most of us pray we never have to go against him. His lips quirked up, but something about the gesture lacked his usual bravado. Of course, there are exceptions. A few people can crush him, no problem. Take the student council president, for example. His smile faltered a little bit. That woman, she's something else. A force that doesn't just move. She shatters whatever stands in her way. Northern glanced down for a moment, remembering their first meeting. Whether because she was truly capable or because he'd been distracted, she had miraculously bypassed his spatial awareness, something not easily done. Not to mention, she was nimble, sharp, and carried a talent that seemed deeply tied to light. Ferocious. But in the end, talent abilities weren't about raw power. They were about how one wielded them. And that was a long, arduous game. Even he was still learning. Kalen looked around, then at the watch on his wrist. Oh dear stars. I've been so engrossed in this delightful conversation that I completely forgot the contest is about to start. He shot to his feet, stretching like a man waking from a pleasant nap, then beamed at Northern. It's going to be so much fun being your friend. My sister. Oh, she's been beside herself with admiration, completely overwhelmed by your strength. And she thinks you're her destiny. And honestly, I almost feel the same way, just in a very different direction. His eyes gleamed mischievously. But worry not. I shall personally convey your lack of interest. Though don't get your hopes up. She's tenacious, unyielding. She might just, resort to extreme measures to reshape, let's say, certain bodily factors to improve her chances. He winked, a playful grin dancing on his lips before he turned away, waving over his shoulder. Then he stopped and looked back. The air shifted, cooled, the easy playfulness in his tone thinning into something sharper, something laced with purpose. Oh, I almost forgot. His smile stretched, but this time it was something else, something keen. If we do cross paths in the duel, please go all out. He tilted his head slightly, voice smooth, deliberate. I want to be the person who defeats you, not half-heartedly. With that, the Kijar Scion walked off, hands slipping casually into his pockets, his figure blending into the shifting movement of the dining hall. Northern sat there. All out? He mouthed the words, letting them settle, letting them dig into the marrow of his mind. Him? Going all out? Why should he? For what reason? The fate of the world was not at stake. There was nothing to gain, nothing to prove. If he went all out, the entire Colosseum wouldn't survive it. And the people within would die. His expression darkened, something cold pooling in his chest. A whisper of a thought brushed against his mind. Be careful what you wish for. This guy, Kalen. He had no idea what he was wishing for. Chapter 831. Self-reproach. The duel contest resumed from where it had left off the previous day. By now, most students had either proven themselves worthy to advance to the next stage or had been defeated. As a result, today's battles carried a more serious tone than before. The atmosphere was intense, with the sounds of steel clashing chaotically, as if threatening to unravel the invisible threads of the wind itself. Northern sat in silent observation, carefully absorbing the essence of each fighter's combat style. He could feel something shifting within him, a blessing of sorts, a swelling sensation of change, pressing against his very being. And at the heart of it all, there was nothing he wanted more than to step into the arena himself and test his sword. The sword. One thing that fascinated him was the sheer diversity of weapons wielded by the competitors. Each fighter had a unique preference, their combat style seamlessly tailored to complement their chosen armament. Northern had fought with Grenger, he had wielded daggers and even an odachi, yet none of them felt as natural as the longsword, the very first weapon with which he had learned the art of combat. There was a sense of comfort, a synchronization between blade and body, that no other weapon had given him. However, as he watched the duels unfold, witnessing the sheer variety of styles and weaponry, a creeping thought began to form. Perhaps that comfort was, in fact, a limitation. His mind turned to the question of how best to unleash the full power of his strikes. And amidst all the combat styles he observed, one in particular began to pique his interest. Bare hands. Northern possessed a vast arsenal of talents, and with the system's ability to combine them, the only true constraint was the breadth of his imagination. In other words, he was not bound by limitations. Which led him to wonder, how could he maximize this advantage? How could he engage in battle while strategically using only a fraction of his talents and abilities, ensuring efficiency without waste? At present, his core talents were Sun Legacy, One True Self, Full Impact, Phantom Strike, Oblivion's Mark, Soul Threads, Frostheart, Whispering Gale, Lightning Rod, Eclipsing Dread. These were the talents he currently possessed, both owned and copied. However, there were some he had manipulated, and he suspected that they might come with a backlash once he attempted to ascend to a new soul rank. Even so, he wasn't too concerned about that. He had more than enough usable talents at his disposal. What worried him was Aster's talent. If he lost it, he could always copy it again. But what he truly feared was facing another penalty. He couldn't afford to delay his Paragon breakthrough any longer than he already had. And there was one last owned talent he needed to upgrade before that. Fortunately, he had accumulated more than enough talent fragments to do so, while still having sufficient resources left to become an ascendant. Each of these talents was meant to provide him with the best possible advantage in any battle he found himself in. Watching the battles unfold, observing how each student wielded their talents with diverse creativity, Northern couldn't help but question his own approach. For someone of his age, had he been too constrained in his thinking? Now that he was truly watching, he looked back on his own battles, the sheer abundance of talents he had at his disposal, and felt something stir. That's a little frustrating. If Nexus, the one who had given him the system, were here watching him all this time, he would probably be very frustrated too. Northern had always believed he didn't need to exert his full power in every battle. He also held the belief that hardship was a necessary forge, tempering warriors into something greater. But now a question gnawed at him. With such values and beliefs, was he sure he wasn't forcing himself into hardships that didn't actually need to be there? Maybe he didn't have to suffer through hardship at all. Northern frowned slightly. That thought was uncomfortable. He did not want to grow complacent. Not with all the unknown dangers lurking beyond this world. Dangers these students couldn't even comprehend as they fought, believing the Milwa contest was their greatest battle. Well, in a way, I am their greatest battle. And I'm here. Northern let out a small grin, but then his thoughts shifted back to the main point. For a while, he pondered his desire for hardship and growth and felt, maybe I am overdoing it? Would it be so bad to crush his enemies in one swift motion? At the same time, he didn't want to feel like a fraud. But he had suffered. He had walked the razor's edge of death more times than he could count to reach this point. So was he not allowed to simply bask in the overwhelming strength he had earned? Then why, whenever he considered it, did he feel like an imposter? Why did he feel like he was being complacent? Was it fear? The fear that he might lose himself in his own power, become stagnant, and stop pushing forward? I can just keep copying talents and upgrading them. But deep down, Northern knew it wasn't just about that. There was no true limit to how powerful a person could become. He could continue copying talents and overwhelming his enemies, but what would happen if one day, an unimaginable adversity crushed him? If it was only then that he realized he had grown weak? Northern did not want to reach that point before understanding his own fragility. Strength and weakness were not absolutes, they were ever-changing, ever-shifting, and he needed to tread carefully. But maybe, just maybe, this carefulness was stopping him from living up to the expectations placed upon him, from being the true anomaly that he was. Even though he was already a menace to existence itself, even though he had accidentally slain a catastrophic behemoth, there was still something lacking. Northern sighed, arms folding across his chest as yet another duel reached its conclusion. He could feel it now, the need for change. To be more outspoken, more expressive in his abilities. Not in words but in actions. Chapter 832. The Feverish Girl. Northern watched as the next few fights unfolded, taking particular note of the student council matches. He also observed Kalen and his sister's battle with interest. Though neither of them were part of the student council, their popularity rivaled its members. Few students at the academy hailed from noble houses while also possessing formidable strength without being affiliated with the council. Northern had seen a handful of them, with Astor providing insight into their backgrounds. He had also carefully noted their abilities. While everyone displayed unique talents, he felt no regret in choosing Eclipsing Dread. More than anything, he wanted to evolve, to push the talent to its full potential. Arms folded, Northern let out a quiet sigh as the final match concluded. It was his turn to step onto the stage once again. He had 2 scheduled fights today, but he intended to participate in only one before returning to Lithia. Tomorrow is going to be hectic. After securing today's victory, he would advance to the quarterfinals, then the semifinals and finals, all of which were set to take place tomorrow. It would be a grueling day. Not for him, of course. The real hassle wasn't the competition itself but having to linger around, waiting for his matches. Still, perhaps he should start paying a little more attention to the people he was up against. Maybe, just maybe, they'd manage to challenge him, even if only slightly. If I'm supposed to take off this imposter's armor, then most likely not. He wasn't one to boast. By nature, he considered himself a humble person. Or at least, he liked to believe he was. But maybe it was time to lean into what he had become, to stop feeling like he was lesser than his actual strength suggested. To finally live up to the power he wielded. With measured steps, Northern emerged onto the stage from the preparation chambers. This time he would be facing not one, but 2 student council members. The third opponent was an unfamiliar noble, a name he didn't recognize but assumed had some level of strength. Northern stepped onto the stage, his gaze settling on the girl before him. She had jet-black hair that reached her shoulders, framing her forehead and stopping just above her brows. Adjusting her round glasses, she strode forward with measured steps before extending a hand. A shimmering cascade of silvery sparks flickered around her palm as something began to manifest. A Sanji gun. The 3 metal rods gleamed ominously under the scorching afternoon sun. With a flick of her wrist, she released them, and in an instant, the segments extended, fusing into a single staff. She swung the rod experimentally, the sheer force displacing the air at her feet in a violent gust. Then, leveling a calm and impassive gaze at Northern, she spoke. "My name is Ayuri Myo, from the Ayuri clan." She paused briefly. "I think it's only honorable to know the name of someone as Awe." Her words faltered. A frown creased her lips. "I mean, like you. Someone like you. What the hell is wrong with me?" Ayuri Myo rarely lost her composure. In fact, one of the reasons she made such an exceptional secretary was her ability to remain calm and calculating, even in the face of danger. Yet, right now, internally, she was anything but composed. Never before had she encountered someone this handsome, this perfectly built, this powerful, all at the same time. At first, it had been the display of strength that caught her attention. But now, looking at his face, an entirely different heat spread from her chest, curling downward until it pooled at the middle of her legs. "He's too handsome. It's unfair." Not just any kind of handsome, a transcendent kind. the type that made every other so-called handsome man look like a cruel joke played by fate. The student standing before her was, in every sense of the word, perfect. If she ever allowed herself to fall into someone's arms, she had always envisioned it would be someone like him, not the spoiled, immature scions of the student council. She had even considered Professor Ruffsberg at one point. For Ayuri Myo, personality had never been a priority. Strength was what mattered. She had no desire for mediocrity. From a young age, she had resolved to stand beside an undeniably powerful man, not due to any familial expectation, but because it was what she wanted. Her family, a minor clan in the grand scheme of things, would have settled for far less. But Ayuri Myo was a dreamer. She never accepted less than what she deemed worthy. And now, standing before her was exactly that. Northern regarded her with his usual impassive gaze, his icy blue eyes faintly glinting under the sun. After a brief pause, he smiled. "I am Rian," he said. "From no clan." Ayuri Myo felt fire crawl up her face. Why? Dark stars. Why is he smiling? Oh no! Her mind imploded in on itself, but outwardly, she remained the picture of rigid discipline. Aside from her rapidly reddening face. And, if one looked closely, her legs were slightly trembling. Northern tilted his head, studying her curiously. "She doesn't look well. Is she running a fever?" Something about her expression made it seem like she had forced herself to step onto the stage despite not feeling well. "I should probably end this quickly so she can go get treated." He nodded slightly and stepped forward. "Can we begin, then?" Ayuri Myo nodded stiffly, gripping her weapon tighter. She swung the rod in a fluid arc, the cadence of twirls turning the black staff into a blurred cyclone before she abruptly dropped into a low stance. Then, without warning, she shot forward, her movements sharp, precise, fast. The wind around her shifted as she tore across the ground toward him. Northern smiled faintly, nodding as he observed her. Profile. Name: Ayuri Myo. True name: Dark Strider. Attributes: Dark Wind. Soul rank: Nomad. Soul core saturation: high. Talent: Lightless Star. Talent class: S. Talent ability: Flurry Flow, Flameless Burn. Interesting ability. Looks like I could copy it when I become an Ascendant. That made two abilities he currently had his eyes on, ones he intended to copy the moment he reached Ascendant. Northern lifted his gaze as Ayuri Myo closed in, faster than ever. "I see. She's this quick because of the Flurry Flow ability." From what he had read of her talents, the first ability rendered her body weightless, while the second imbued her strikes with a burn effect, though it produced no visible flames. It seems she relies heavily on her combat prowess. Northern wasn't sure if he had seen her fight today, or perhaps he had, but failed to register it through the clone's memory before now. He would have liked the fight to last a little longer, just enough to analyze her technique. But she isn't well. She seemed like a kind person, and while that had no bearing on the match, he still found himself unwilling to drag it out longer than necessary. It would be best to end it quickly so she could head to the infirmary. Still, to be able to move like that while running a fever, she must be enduring a lot. Northern exhaled quietly. "It displeases me that I have to use erasure, or should I say Oblivion's mark on her." That ability was meant as a last resort, something he reserved for monsters and opponents too resilient to break through with sheer might. But he had no reason to hesitate. Activating the ability, he moved, his figure blurred, and before Ayuri Myo's rod could even descend, he was already there, intercepting her. Ayuri Myo suddenly found herself face to face with the one person who had completely unraveled her composed interior. Her heart lurched, her breath broke with wide gaps, her entire body quaked. She felt as if she was about to evaporate into steam. The cold air barely registered. Instead, the heat inside her body roared, boiling, as if several volcanoes had erupted around her, detonating in dazzling bursts of flame. Too close. Chapter 833. Deception. Huh? She stopped moving, Northern's interception had been swift, perhaps too swift. So fast that she hadn't even registered it properly. He had expected some kind of instinctual reaction, some frenzied movement the moment he stepped tightly into her space. But instead, she froze, wide-eyed, motionless, hands suspended mid-air, not even attempting to maneuver her strike. She simply stared at him, blinking. He didn't understand. Then again, he had never truly understood women. Not in this world, not even in his previous one. Back then, he had been grateful that someone had loved him first, approached him first, married him first. So he never had to wrestle with the complexities of navigating the mind of a woman. But of course, that person had turned out to be a liar, a cheater, a betrayal carved into his bones. Everything he thought he had learned from her had long been discarded, burned to ash. He had come to believe they were nothing but falsehoods, spun by a foolish girl to manipulate his naivete. And she had succeeded. Even so, this situation needs to be handled. With Oblivion's mark already activated, her abilities had been sealed. She had probably just felt the sudden change in her weight, the sharp drop in her speed. Northern let out a quiet sigh and reached forward. He grasped her wrist, slowly lowering her arm, keeping his touch controlled yet firm. His other hand shifted behind her lower back, steadying her in case she lost balance. Still no reaction. She was too frozen to resist. His fingers brushed against the metal of her Sanjigun, and he gently pried it from her grip. The entire time, she remained utterly unmoving. I guess the fever is worse than I thought. He cast a brief glance at the weapon, admiring its craftsmanship before casually tossing it backward. Then, stepping away from her, he spoke in an even tone. I've sealed your abilities. You won't be able to use them. You can surrender now and leave, or I can knock you out and make this quicker. He assumed that would be the end of it. But Ayuri Myo wasn't listening. She couldn't hear anything. Her world was exploding. Not with fear, not with panic, but with a blinding, euphoric detonation of dark stars. Beautiful, all-consuming, inescapable. When he touched her hand, she had felt it. A tingling sensation that rippled through her body, declaring the arrival of her conqueror, announcing the inevitability of her submission. Surrender. The word echoed in her mind, but the rest of his sentence was lost. She did surrender. She had already surrendered. And then, without a moment's hesitation, she blurted out, "Of course, I would surrender to you. Please, make good use of me." Northern stared at her. His expression barely shifted, but internally, there was a distinct sensation of discomfort crawling along his spine. The way her dark eyes gleamed burned, with something fervent, something dangerous, struck an uneasy chord within him. Somehow, he saw the shadow of a certain person lurking beneath that gaze, and it made his skin crawl. Something feels off. Am I misunderstanding something? Northern stood there, sincerely perplexed as Ayuri Myo remained in front of him, staring at him in an oddly unsettling way. The arena had fallen into a brief silence, as if everyone was waiting for something. Then he sighed. I guess I'll just knock her out. That seemed like the easiest solution to dissolve whatever this was. His figure vanished, reappearing behind her. Ayuri Myo's eyes barely had time to widen before her body crumpled, collapsing instantly to the ground. His hands had moved too fast for anyone to see, leaving not a single soul in the Colosseum aware of what had just happened. Northern turned to the announcer, who looked equally stunned. Still struggling to process the moment, the man quickly gathered himself and called out, The winner is Rian Artemis Lael of the non-combative school." The moment the words left his mouth, the Colosseum erupted into a thunderous roar of cheers, the fragmented announcement doing little to dampen the excitement. Northern watched as the medics flowed in with practiced efficiency, seamlessly lifting Ayuri Myo onto a stretcher before carrying her away with the same smooth precision. I wish her a quick and safe recovery. Exhaling softly, he shifted his gaze to the next opponent already stepping onto the stage. This one had blood-red hair, a deeper, more intense crimson compared to Len's. His expression carried a certain lightness, a perpetual smile playing at his lips. He approached at a relaxed pace, hands stuffed into his pockets. Then, as he reached Northern, shards of luminant armor flickered into place over his body, assembling like pieces of glass catching the light. Still smiling, he regarded Northern with an almost gentle admiration. "Your might is overwhelming, really?" His eyes flicked toward the audience. The crowd had gone eerily still, watching in anticipation. "I don't want to experience a humiliating defeat, so I'll give you my best attack. If it doesn't leave a scratch on you, then I'll just surrender." Northern's eyes narrowed slightly. That's strange. No one had ever proposed such an easy way out before. Was the guy a coward? Or was he smart, someone who understood, or at least suspected, the sheer chasm that existed between their strength? Not my concern. In fact, this wasn't a bad deal. Northern wanted to wrap this up quickly anyway, but, folding his arms across his chest, he smirked slightly, his eyes gleaming with quiet confidence. "Don't you think that's a little unfair? Shouldn't it be the same for me?" The red-haired boy raised an eyebrow. Northern continued, "You give me your best attack and I give you mine. The one still standing at the end is the winner." For a moment, the student seemed to consider it before shaking his head. "No, no. It would have been unfair if you weren't as powerful as you are. But yesterday already proved to all of us that you're like an impregnable wall." He chuckled dryly, shaking his head again. "We're terrified of fighting you. Strangely enough, Myo's really excited about it, but that's none of my business." He sighed. "I mean, we're all terrified of you. So, save us a little public embarrassment, okay?" Northern averted his gaze for a moment, scratching his cheek awkwardly. He sighed. "Then let's do it this way instead." The red-haired student's eyes lifted expectantly. Northern spoke evenly. "I'll hit you with my weakest attack. If you're still standing, I'll surrender. It'll be my first official loss." The student visibly brightened. His eyes widened, excitement flashing in them like a glint of red steel. Oh, that's so generous of you." A wide grin stretched across his face. A little too wide. His eyes gleamed with something just a little bit off. Dark. Calculating. Hey, I never expected him to fall for it. I'm such a genius. Chapter 834. The Cost of Underestimation. It had become effortless for Northern to perceive the true essence of one's soul. Over time, a semblance of Chaos Eye's ability had rubbed off on his mundane sight as well. So, while it wasn't as clear as when he activated Chaos Eyes, he could still discern a person's intent to a reasonable extent. He could see the truth, the lies, and the foolishness of mankind. Some of these emotions were too convoluted, tangled into a mess he couldn't quite navigate, like that of the girl he had just fought. But others were as clear as the midday sky. From the moment the red-haired boy spoke, Northern saw something lurking in the depths of his soul. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't a truth either. And the more the boy spoke, the more that things spiraled into a strange, creeping darkness. Then came the suggestion to use his weakest ability. Northern watched as that darkness settled, curling into a comfortable stillness. The boy was convinced. Through subtle manipulations, he believed he had steered Northern into making a rash decision. Of course, there was no way he could predict Northern's exact choice of words or actions. Instead, he relied on the overwhelming confidence that someone of Northern's caliber would inevitably display. And since Northern had coincidentally decided to lean into the persona of an overpowered character, everything seemed to unfold perfectly in the red-haired boy's favor. At least that's what it looked like. The real problem, and the reason Northern pitted him, was that the so-called weakest talent he had chosen, there was no way the boy would be able to defend it. It was a talent so absurdly cunning that even Void Force had struggled to defend against it. But since the boy had meticulously crafted such a delicate path to victory for himself, Northern wanted to believe he had a plan, however cowardly it seemed. So, in respect for his supposed preparedness, Northern would respond sincerely. With his weakest attack, he just might put his bone into it. I hope he entertains me a bit. The boy's body gleamed with radiant armor, its surface polished like a mirror. It caught the scorching afternoon light, bending and scattering it, flinging the brilliance straight into Northern's face. But Northern wasn't bothered. Chaos Eyes had altered his mundane sight in ways even he didn't fully comprehend. One of its lingering effects rendered him immune to light-based distractions. He could raise his gaze and stare into the heart of a blazing sun for hours, unaffected, unblinking. The rays could be sharp, piercing, but they never obscured what he needed to see. If anything, it was as if the very particles of light parted, clearing the way for his vision to pierce through. There was a force at play, a concept governed by Chaos Eyes, just as he could subtly influence gravity. So, the blinding radiance of the boy's armor did not faze him in the slightest. The boy, however, was grinning, pleased with himself as though he had already seized victory. My name is Tristein Voldeberg of the Voldeberg clan. Northern gave a nod. What is with their manner of introducing themselves? It seemed only proper to return the gesture, though he saw little point in such formalities. He opened his mouth and spoke. I am Rian, of no clan. Tristian's grin widened. He bobbed his head, exuding pure elation. I am ready. Everything about him radiated confidence. He had accounted for two possible outcomes, two carefully calculated instances. Of course, both still carried the possibility of his demise, but his planning had been meticulous. After witnessing the first battle with Ayuri Myo, Tristein had noticed something crucial. The student hadn't used a single talent. That solidified his theory. Northern's primary abilities had to be tied to fire and ice. That was all he had displayed before. His flight? A complex interplay of those elements, heat and frost working in tandem, counterbalancing forces. And so, Tristein reached a conclusion. Northern's overwhelming offensive meant one thing. His defense would be lacking. That was the nature of elemental talents. They made for devastating attacks but often fell short in fortification. Ice could form thick walls, but in the end it was still ice, breakable. His laser would pierce through with ease. The same applied to fire. A wall of flames was no different from a wall of water. His attack would carve through it like a blade through parchment. And if Northern chose to go on the offensive instead, even better. Tristian's hand brushed over his armor, its weight a comforting presence. It had been a gift from his grandfather, a relic of the old world, an ancient armor, a treasure so rare that even paragons would wage wars to claim it. His grandfather had simply given it to him. The armor was said to be capable of deflecting even the full force of the daylight star itself. A chuckle rumbled in his throat, barely suppressed. I love you, Granddad. This armor, this moment, was going to etch his name into the Academy's history. He could already hear the whispers of his legend forming. Tristein Voldeberg, the first student to defeat the boy whom the Academy thought they could never defeat. The one who put the strange, non-combative student to his place. His shoulders shook with barely contained laughter. Try as he might, he couldn't hold back the giddy excitement bubbling within him. Northern prepared his attack. Just as he had promised, it would be the weakest in his arsenal. The one talent he had never upgraded, had barely thought about and had nearly forgotten. Whispering Gale. He had never liked it. The wind talent lacked the raw devastation of his other abilities. The only merit it held was its habit of slipping through defenses, striking without warning, silent, unseen, unannounced. And now, what Northern meant by putting his bones into it was, with the void essence of a sage and his own improvisation thanks to DIY, he would forge a wind blade large enough to make an impression. His eyes narrowed as he gauged the boy's height. He trusted Tristein to defend himself or, at the very least, to withstand the attack without suffering fatal damage. So he crafted the blade to match the boy's size. But the blade was not steel. It was wind itself, formless, invisible, a whisper carried by the air. To the untrained eye, the only sign of its existence was a faint gust swirling at Northern's feet. He didn't even need to move.
No swing.
No gesture. Just a thought. and the wind obeyed. It surged forward, masked in its own nature, veiled beyond perception. The crowd held its breath. Everyone was waiting for an attack. Even Tristein, practically trembling with anticipation, was soaked in the sweat of expectation. "Come on! Are you even Goy?" His words sliced apart. A terrible gore spilled forth, from his right shoulder, across his torso down to his right waist. Chapter 835. Hollow and empty. Tristein was waiting for it, bracing for it. He didn't know what trick Northern was about to pull, but he was certain of one thing: he would endure. He would defend against it all. He had witnessed the rain of comets Northern had unleashed upon Tever, the sheer annihilation, the unrelenting descent of destruction. And yet, even if the entire battlefield was reduced to ruin, even if every single soul perished, he wouldn't. The ancient armor ensured that. It would reflect all damage away from him. No attack could breach it. Not even a paragon's attack could crack its defenses. It was an absurd, invincible force, standing as the bulwark against absolute devastation. No doubt about it, whatever Northern was preparing, even if it was his most fearsome strike, it would be reflected without consequence. And yet, why was that stars-forsaken student stalling? Tristein waited. Seconds stretched, crawling. A strange mixture of anticipation and frustration twisted within him. It was maddening. The delay gnawed at him, scraping against his nerves like a dull blade. Still, he waited. And then he snapped. "Come on! Are you even Goy?" His words never finished. Something sliced the air silent. Sudden. Absolute. A gust of wind collided with him. No, it carved through him. The impact was instant. Horrific. A grotesque gore line erupted from his right shoulder, slashing down through his torso, rending flesh apart, carving straight to his right waist. Blood sprayed. Tristein staggered back, his eyes wide. Disbelief crashed over him in a suffocating wave. His breath retreated into his lungs. A strangled gasp of pain and confusion. He hadn't seen the attack, hadn't sensed it, hadn't even felt the moment it struck. But that wasn't the worst part. It had ignored the ancient armor. No, it hadn't even attacked the armor. It had passed through it. The realization was horrifying. The ancient armor, a relic item beyond comprehension, was meaningless. The force of the attack didn't shatter it, it split from the inside. Something surged up his throat. Blood. Thick, warm, uncontrollable. His mouth filled with the taste of iron as his legs wobbled beneath him. His mind clawed for an answer, but there was none. The world spun. Colors bled into a blur. Before he could grasp what had happened, his consciousness plunged into darkness. And then nothing. Northern watched, his expression subtly startled, as his opponent collapsed into a growing pool of his own blood. The medics rushed onto the stage this time. Faster, sharper, more urgent than before. There were more of them, moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed drill. Some carried first-aid kits, while others, healers, pressed glowing hands against the unconscious boy's chest, working desperately to stabilize him. Northern remained still, observing in silence. The crowd, too, held its breath. An eerie, awestruck hush settling over the Colosseum. No one had seen an attack. Not a flicker of movement. Not a single visible strike. Yet Tristein had fallen. Disbelief and terror stitched themselves into the spectators' wide-eyed expressions. Their gazes flitted between the unscathed Northern and the frantic medics tending to the casualty. Gasps, some sharp, some strangled, choked the throats of those trying to process what had just transpired. A short sequence of emergency procedures followed before the medics finally hoisted Tristein onto a stretcher and hurriedly carried him away, disappearing through the arena's exit. And then, as if released from a spell, the announcer hesitantly climbed onto the stage, his voice trembling with barely concealed fear as he declared the victor. At the sound of the announcement, the Colosseum erupted. The roar of the crowd rippled through the sky, deafening, exultant, frenzied. The bloodshed was forgotten. They seemed not care anymore. No, What truly thrilled them was the terrifying spectacle that had just unfolded. A student had won a match without moving an inch. And that fact alone sent them into hysterical awe. Just how powerful is he? Damn! Is he a paragon? How is anyone supposed to defeat that? Oh, dead gods! He's such a monster. I like him. The cheers swelled. A chaotic mix of excitement, disbelief, and more unsettling, disturbing admiration. Northern sighed and looked away. That's disappointing. Had he miscalculated? Put too much into the attack? No, he was sure he hadn't. Whispering Gale was only an A-class talent. The only thing that could have made it truly lethal was the compressed essence he had channeled into it. And Tristein had been so sure of his victory, so overconfident. Northern had simply trusted in that confidence. Had he misjudged? His thoughts lingered on the uncertainty, but there was no time to dwell. The next opponent was already stepping onto the arena. A young man stood before Northern. Nothing particularly notable about him. Short, inky black hair, clinging to his forehead damp. Northern's gaze narrowed slightly. Damp! His head tilted in mild surprise. Is he sweating? Beads of sweat flooded down the boy's face like he had been caught in a downpour. His expression broken. His shoulders trembling. Yet, despite it all, he was trying to stand tall. Northern observed him for a moment. Then, without urgency, he stepped forward. Each step brought a visible reaction. The boy's legs buckled, faltered as if gravity itself had turned against him. The moment Northern stopped in front of him, the boy's resolve crumbled. His face twisted, breath ragged, his body one twitch away from collapse. Northern's expression softened. He gave the boy a kind smile and placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. Would you like to surrender? The boy nodded vigorously. Northern tapped his shoulder twice, his voice calm but firm. There's no shame in that, my friend. Knowing when to surrender and daring to is an act of bravery. So don't feel bad about it. Today, you were stronger than all your teammates. Northern smiled and gestured for the boy to leave the stage. The poor student sheepishly obeyed, legs unsteady. His body hollowed out by sheer relief as he practically fled from the arena. The announcer, still grappling with the surreal turn of events, cleared his throat, trying and failing to mask his own disbelief. Well, yet another clean victory. Another win for the non-combative student. Rian. The Colosseum erupted. A deafening surge of cheers, chants, and praises flooded the air, voices overlapping in chaotic exultation. Northern glanced at them, all of them, and sighed. This got boring fast. The thrill had faded. The moment of awe, the sight of them holding their breath at his display of power, had been satisfying. Momentarily. But it was fleeting, hollow, unfulfilling. He had indulged in their reactions, yet they felt meaningless. I need to return to Lithia. Chapter 836. Damn Paragon. Northern returned to Lithia immediately, leaving his clone to handle matters for the rest of the day. Depending on how things unfolded, he might even let it continue until the end of the contest. Still, he remained skeptical. There were a few people he wanted to test himself against. Particularly the student council president and her team. That group intrigued him the most. For now, though, his focus shifted back to Lithia. The cramped space of his room felt slightly uncomfortable, not in size but in atmosphere. Despite the brilliant shafts of light that managed to seep through the small window, the corners remained stubbornly cloaked in shadows. Darkness clung there, unmoving. Northern exhaled and stood up. Over the past few hours, several people, acting under Paragon Rizel's instruction, had knocked on his door only to be met with silence. Now, for the first time in the day, even though noon had long arrived, his door finally creaked open. Jessie turned, her gaze settling on him as she bowed her head slightly. You've woken up. Yes, I have, Northern replied, meeting her eyes. He paused, observing her for a few moments before raising an eyebrow. How long have you been standing here? Jessie bowed her head again before answering. Not too long. I only came when I noticed people constantly disturbing your chambers. Northern regarded her with a dubious expression. And exactly how long was that, Jessie? She scrunched her face slightly, counting on her fingers before raising her head again. About 6 hours? I'm not sure. It was sometime around dawn. Northern stared at her blankly for a few moments before exhaling in resignation. Go get some rest. Oh wait, actually, I'm not even sure what you do. Just go socialize or something. Stop acting like you're a void summon. Northern waved a hand dismissively at Jessie as he strode forward. Within minutes, he was making his way down the hallway when a sudden voice boomed through the air. Oh my goodness! My mentee, Ral. Stars above. I've sent 1,000,000 people to find you. And now, here you are, arriving at just the right time. It took Northern a moment to pinpoint the voice. It came from behind a closed window near a door. His eyes settled on it just as the window swung open from the inside. Northern frowned slightly, gaze sharpening as he studied the paragon standing within. How did he know it was me when the window was closed? Paragons were paragons, such feats shouldn't be surprising, yet it still amazed him. If a sage like himself could sense others beyond sight, then it stood to reason a paragon would be capable of far more. Through the window, Northern caught a glimpse of the room's interior. A large conference space dominated by a grand, circular table surrounded by chairs. Seated at the table were Paragon Rizel and 2 others. Please, my mentee. Come in. Make yourself comfortable. Northern hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. Rizel's voice carried a casual warmth, but beneath that ease, his words held absolute authority. One that left no room for objection. We were just about to have a very important meeting, Rizel continued smoothly. I think it's only right that you join us. The 2 men seated at the table remained silent. One of them, however, had a flicker of hesitation on his face. A brief moment of suppressed resistance that Northern caught almost immediately. Something about this feels off. The atmosphere within the room unsettled him. It wasn't hostile, not overtly. But there was an undercurrent of expectation, an unspoken tension laced within the very air. He turned to Rizel, his gaze steady, about to refuse. But before he could part his lips, Paragon Rizel's voice rang out again, articulate and commanding. Please, Rian, I insist. It's important. There was a weight to the words that pressed against Northern's will. A subtle force laced into the Paragon's voice made refusal feel difficult. He exhaled slowly. Then, without a word, he dragged a chair back and took a seat. Paragon Rizel watched as Northern settled into his chair, his expression unreadable, before finally speaking. Ascendant Zion. Sage Mac. This is Sage Rian, the young man responsible for bringing us supplies and saving civilians. His importance in this meeting lies in the fact that he successfully crossed the mountains, despite them being overrun by monsters and rifts. I believe his insight will be instrumental to our discussion. Is that agreeable to both of you? His voice carried no room for debate. Even if it's not, Rizel added with a casual shrug. I don't plan on changing my decision, but at the very least, knowing where you both stand will help me direct the path of this meeting, whether with your approval or without it. Sage Mac, the man who had shown a flicker of hesitation earlier, exhaled and finally spoke. His voice was thin, almost melodic, like someone who might have made a good singer in another life. I'm not particularly displeased, sir. I just feel it was uncalled for. We 3 have led the city's council for a long time. Thanks to our powers, the city has endured. That should mean something. Rizel met his words with a flat, unwavering stare. His face remained an emotionless mask, utterly unreadable. I understand your sentiment, Mac, but you're mistaken. He paused. I am the council of this place. You 2, while valuable, are simply great backups. Do you honestly think you'd survive out there if I weren't barking orders like a demented dog? Sage Mac lowered his head slightly. I didn't mean it like that, sir. Geez, I was just joking with you. Rizel's booming laughter filled the room. You looked like your face was about to melt. That was hilarious. Despite the Paragon's outlandish claim of humor, Sage Mac still wore a guarded expression, his gaze sinking to the table. Rizel then shifted his attention to the Ascendant. The handsome man with ashen wavy hair, neatly tied back, shook his head slightly. "I'm not displeased in any way." His eyes flicked toward Northern, sharp with curiosity. "Instead, I find myself wondering just how strong he is for you to take such an interest in him. You've never spared me or Mac that kind of attention." A beat passed. Then, with a slight smirk, he added, "Not that I'm jealous." Rizel leaned forward suddenly, his grin widening. "Well, none of your rotten asses have ever killed a behemoth by mistake." The room froze. A heavy silence gripped the air as both Sage Mac and Ascendant Zion stiffened. Then, at the exact same time, "What?" Their voices boomed in unison, eyes widening in shock. Northern, meanwhile, frowned darkly at Rizel, cursing the Paragon in silence. Chapter 837. The Roundtable Meeting, Part 1. "What? He killed a behemoth? By mistake?" Their voices overlapped in fragmented disbelief, as if their minds refused to fully process the revelation. Both Sage Mac and Ascendant Zion turned to stare at Paragon Rizel, their expressions caught between shock and incredulity. Rizel, however, merely scratched the back of his head, his laughter slow and almost too casual. "Ha, ha, ha, that just slipped out, boy. Don't mind me." He waved a hand lazily. "When you get old, your mouth gets real loose. Ha ha. You'll understand when you reach my age." Northern said nothing, his expression darkening. A shadow of malice flickered across his face. The Ascendant and Sage turned to him simultaneously. "Is Paragon Rizel really telling the truth? Did you actually kill a behemoth? By mistake?" Sage Mac emphasized, as if that part was particularly important. Northern remained silent, but he didn't need to answer. His face alone confirmed everything. More importantly, Rizel had no reason to tell a pointless lie. "How?" Ascendant Zion pressed, his tone rising. "How did you do it?" His voice carried genuine disbelief. "You're not even an Ascendant yet. Killing a destroyer should be impossible for you, let alone a behemoth. Only a Paragon has the right to slay one." Northern's expression darkened further. What nonsense. He had even killed a Belial before. What did they mean by the right to slay a behemoth? These people needed to study their assignments better. These days anyone could kill anything, at least that was how it worked for him. Before the conversation could escalate further, Rizel sighed dramatically. "Hey, you two! Back off the poor boy!" Immediately, both Sage Mac and Ascendant Zion leaned back into their seats, but their curiosity remained evident in their gazes. From time to time, their eyes flickered toward Northern, burning with unspoken questions. Rizel exhaled, his tone shifting into something more serious. "So, I'll stop hiding things from you all. What I'm about to say is classified, a high-ranking military secret, and I want you to either die with this knowledge or leave the room right now." The air grew heavier. His gaze swept over them, not with force, but with something far stronger. A quiet, inescapable weight. "So, I assume we're all on the same page?" Northern hesitated for a moment before slowly raising his hand. Before he could even lift it fully, Rizel cut in smoothly. "Don't worry, Ral. As my disciple, you get an automatic pass." His grin spread wide, almost too wide. A grim shadow crossed Northern's face. Rizel, ignoring the look, clapped his hands once. "Now then, let's start from the beginning." Paragon Rizel leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table as his gaze swept over them. "Do any of you have any idea who's behind this devastation?" Ascendant Zion glanced at Sage Mac, their shared confusion evident. "Isn't the strange behavior of the monsters to blame for that?" Zion questioned. "The only odd thing is why more of them drift towards Lithia. But I wouldn't assume other places have it any easier than we do." Northern's eyes widened slightly. "They don't know." He said nothing, but the realization was clear. Ascendant Zion was completely unaware that Lithia was the only city under siege. Rizel exhaled, turning his head. Ral, please explain the situation to them. Northern was momentarily taken aback. That wasn't mentioned beforehand. He hadn't even known this meeting was happening, much less that he would be speaking in it. Just like how Rizel hadn't told his subordinates that someone new would be joining them. Whatever knack for surprises he's got, it's a bad habit. Suppressing his irritation, he exhaled. His cold eyes darkened further as he regarded them with the unfiltered truth. Right now, Lithia is the only city under siege by monsters. Both Sage Mac and Ascendant Zion's eyes widened in shock. What? What did you just say? Zion's voice boomed. Sage Mac, on the other hand, looked troubled, a deep frown settling over his features. That doesn't make any sense. Why? Northern flicked his gaze toward the Paragon before continuing. You've been cut off from the rest of the world. While the military is subtly moving behind the scenes, I don't know exactly how they're controlling monsters on such a massive scale, but one thing is certain, they're the only ones benefiting from what's happening in Lithia. A tense silence followed. Ascendant Zion turned to Rizel. The Paragon sighed, then finally spoke. A long time ago, I had a friend. His voice was measured, slow. An incredible and intelligent man. He admired the idea of service. Loved the military because, to him, they served the continent selflessly without personal greed. That's the kind of person he always wanted to be. They listened intently as Rizel continued. But our paths diverged. He joined the military, rising to become a formidable and influential figure. Then, 3 years ago, he became a Paragon. That's when he came to me with an offer to own me. He wanted to dominate the entire continent, level everything into equality, and revolutionize the selfishness of nations and cities. Rizel's voice took on an edge, his eyes narrowing. There were more details to it, but that's not important now. What is important is that I refused him. That was the moment he marked me as his enemy. The Paragon leaned back slightly, exhaling. I believe Lithia's misfortune is directly tied to my presence. Either he wants to keep me trapped here long enough to finish his plans, or he's devised some insidious way to kill me, because he knows I'll be in his way. A brief silence fell. Northern studied the man. The moment Rizel finished speaking, he finally said, I'm not sure, but this childhood friend you're talking about, would his name happen to be Dante? Rizel visibly stiffened. His body nearly lurched backward from sheer surprise. For a second, his composure wavered. Then, as if effortlessly regaining control, he smiled. Oh my? You know Dante? Northern shrugged. Not anything too deep. There was a rift situation in Arcadia, that was where I met him. We challenged it together. Rizel's mouth dropped open. You challenged a rift with Dante? Northern casually nodded. Yes, I did. Chapter 838. The Round Table Meeting, Part 2. You challenged a rift with Dante? Northern casually nodded. Yes, I did. Ah, you did. Paragon Rizel stared at him blankly. For a moment, even he wasn't sure what was going on in his own head. What was this? Was this what they called fate? How could it be that this strange existence, a boy he had randomly encountered by nothing more than pure coincidence, if it could be called so, had also met Dante under those same impossible circumstances? A corner of Paragon Rizel's lips curled upward. Looks like the stars really are smiling upon me. He leaned back into his chair, tapping the armrest lightly as he studied Northern with an ever-present smile. The room remained silent. Ascendant Zion and Sage Mac seemed equally uncertain about why their Paragon found this revelation particularly intriguing. Not that they could be blamed. After all, they did not know Dante. Even Northern couldn't claim to know him. Sure, he had seen Dante display an impressive level of strength, but for all he could tell, the man had never used anything resembling essence manifestation, nor had he mentioned it. If what Paragon Rizel had explained was true, then Dante was far more powerful than he had let on. Which meant, he had misled them all during the rift. A small frown slowly creased Northern's forehead. That means he knew. If Dante had entered the rift with the intention of misleading everyone, then he had acknowledged, from the start, that everyone outside his circle of allies was an enemy. Because only someone who knew best what atrocities they were about to commit could act with such careful deceit. Then there was his proposal, the offer of a single wish. It had to be for a reason. Yet again, Northern found himself used. Realizing it, he bit down on his inner lip. But at the same time, not quite. He wouldn't say he had been used, not in the way that implied manipulation without gain. No, this was different. It had been mutual. He had something to gain from it, just as Dante did. And because he had something to gain, because Dante had promised to fulfill 3 of his wishes, he owed him 1 in return. That was the balance. And because of the kind of person Northern had been, and somewhere, in the depths of his soul, still was, he felt compelled to uphold his end of the bargain. He had given his word. And as a man, he was supposed to live up to it. Paragon Rizel finally leaned forward, his smile brightening just a little. "This is even better," he mused. "Since you know Dante, that will make things much easier for me." His fingers tapped absently against the armrest again, but his gaze remained sharp, assessing. "I also don't believe it's mere coincidence that you're here." His tone shifted, curiosity sharpening to something colder. "Perhaps he tried to trap you too?" Rizel considered the thought for a second before shaking his head. "No. That wouldn't make much sense, seeing as you walked in with the knowledge that there was a blockade." Silence stretched between them. The paragon seemed to drift deeper into his thoughts, eyes narrowing as if contemplating possibilities beyond the room's walls. Then he exhaled, his expression tightening, the faintest crease appearing between his brows. Finally, his gaze locked onto Northern, steady and unrelenting. "Ral," he said, his voice dipping into a more serious register. "I have a question for you, if you don't mind." Northern met his stare evenly. At this point, he could already guess what the paragon wanted to ask. "Please go ahead." Rizel's expression lost its previous amusement entirely. His gaze held no trace of playfulness now, only weight, sharp and heavy. His next words were spoken with absolute gravity. "Why are you here?" The question settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples unseen but deeply felt. "Why did you come?" Northern remained silent for a while, the question lingering in his mind just as it had in the paragon's. Then, finally, he raised his head, meeting Rizel's gaze. It was sort of sentimental. The words caught Paragon Rizel off guard. His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that Northern noticed the faintest wince of surprise. "You don't seem the type to dote on sentiments," Rizel remarked. Northern merely shrugged. "But I was rather curious." "So curiosity, then," Rizel mused, his lips twitching upward. "That sounds far more fitting. Trying to picture you being sentimental. Tisk. It's just not working in my head." He shook his head slightly, studying Northern, who only stared back at him blankly. A moment passed before Northern spoke. "A teacher of mine came around to deliver weapons. I don't know the full details, but she had to make a serious delivery with her father. Unfortunately," he paused, his voice lowering, "she came back with a missing leg, and both of her father's arms were gone." Northern frowned slightly. "I wouldn't say it was just curiosity," he admitted, his voice measured. "While I do agree with you that sentimentality isn't my thing, it just didn't make sense." He exhaled slowly, eyes darkening. "For someone who imparted so much knowledge to me, the idea that something could threaten her life, that I, with all the power I hold, would sit back and do nothing about it." His voice trailed off, the thought unfinished. The blue light in Northern's eyes flickered, burning just a little fiercer, almost threatening. Rizel observed him closely, his own expression unreadable. "Oh," the paragon murmured, "so that's how it is." His tone softened slightly, dipping into something closer to sympathy. "I'm sorry. Perhaps I spoke foolishly." He leaned back, nodding slightly. "But I understand better now. It was a coincidence, then." Northern's frown eased. though his expression remained distant. He glanced away briefly, as if weighing his words, before speaking again. "I don't think it is." Reisel's gaze sharpened. "Pardon me?" Northern looked up again, this time with quiet certainty, a confidence smoldering behind his eyes. "I don't think it was a coincidence." A small frown formed on the Paragon's face. "And why do you believe that?" Northern hesitated. He wasn't sure whether to say it out loud. But in the end, he did. "Someone knew I was coming here," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. "I don't know how, but it felt deliberate, like someone had personally prepared for my arrival." He paused, his next words colder. "And it seems it was the same person who supplied the stimulants." Chapter 839. Iltis, Part 1. Northern hesitated. Revealing this information was a risk, a vital one. After all, it directly involved him, and more than that, it strongly insinuated that he had won himself a capable stalker. Many things remained unknown, and sharing what little he knew felt dangerously close to exposing his own vulnerabilities. And that was something Northern loathed. Yet, despite how he felt, he had still chosen to speak. Why? Because experience had taught him a harsh truth, especially in this world. No matter how much he tried to do things alone, there was always a limit. And more importantly, there was always a chance that he could do it wrong. Northern was still skeptical about trusting people. He always would be. But he was logical, practical. Someone like Paragon Reisel had nothing to gain from deceiving or using him. At least not yet. Not when the Paragon had no definitive grasp of just how terrifyingly strong Northern truly was. The same applied to Paragon Dante. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, the man's request of Northern had been based on intelligence. Lieutenant Dante had seen something in him, something he recognized. And since he couldn't claim Northern as his own, he had chosen another approach. Now, whether that choice would ultimately benefit or harm Northern, that would depend entirely on what Dante asked of him the next time they met. If they ever met again. But above all, there was someone out there who knew of him, someone he had no knowledge of. That fact alone was enough for Northern to acknowledge a bitter truth. He needed help. Of course, that didn't mean he was going to be reckless about it. He had no intention of being stupid, of exposing himself unnecessarily or, worse, placing himself at a disadvantage. For example, telling Reisel about the one wish. Hell no. This much, what he had already revealed, was more than enough. Paragon Reisel, however, was visibly taken aback. The surprise on his face remained frozen in place, etched deeply into his expression even as the seconds passed. "So," his voice was carefully paced, "you think our supplier of stimulants deliberately chose you for a reason?" His gaze sharpened. "And why do you believe this? What proof do you have?" Northern was silent for a moment. Then, with a soft breath, he spoke. "Byran." Paragon Reisel's expression snapped into something unrecognizable. His pupils constricted, his body tensing, and in the next second he moved. In one fluid motion, he shot up from his seat, his hand extending toward the empty air as if attempting to crush something unseen. But then he froze mid-motion. A visible tremor ran through him, and instead of striking, he took an involuntary step back. At that exact moment, a rift began to tear open in the middle of the meeting room. Paragon Reisel's face turned ashen. Ascendant Zion and Sage Mac both looked like they had just seen a ghost. No, it was worse. Their faces went deathly white and their bodies trembled violently. Byran stepped calmly out of the rift, his movements fluid and composed. Beside him emerged a slender, impeccably dressed man. Prim, proper, and refined, with a fine mustache that curled slightly at the ends. Northern hadn't expected this. Of all the possibilities that had crossed his mind, the shopkeeper looking so well-groomed and elegant was not one of them. In fact, he had expected the complete opposite. And yet, here the man stood, straight-backed and composed, exuding a presence more suited to a noble than whatever tattered and meager figure Northern had imagined. He was surprised. Byran smiled faintly, bowing as the rift behind them closed. The shopkeeper mirrored his movement, dipping into a bow just as deep. "Master," Byran said smoothly, his tone as calm as ever, "I relegated the task you assigned me to Revant. It was completed rather quickly." Northern's expression twitched. A sudden, almost instinctive sympathy bloomed in his chest. "Revant, Revant, Revant, Revant." He could only shake his head. The mere thought of what the shopkeeper must have endured to get to this stage, within just a handful of hours, was enough to make Northern pity the man. With a sigh, he refocused and turned to face Paragon Rizel. "This is my source," he stated simply. He gestured toward the meticulously dressed shopkeeper. The man, ever poised, bowed once more at the introduction. "You may ask me anything you wish, sirs," the shopkeeper said, his voice smooth, polished, and composed. "I will answer truthfully and honestly, holding nothing back." Rizel, however, barely seemed to register the words. His focus remained elsewhere. He was still shaken. Not by the rift itself, though that too was unsettling, but by what he had felt just before it had opened. And that was what truly unsettled him. Yes, the phenomenon was strange, perhaps even unseen before, but the idea that someone possessed a talent capable of creating a rift was not entirely impossible. What terrified him, what truly shook him, was the sheer presence he had felt in that instant. It was overwhelming. For a fleeting moment before the rift appeared, Rizel had felt something impossible. Thousands, no, tens of thousands, of creatures, terrifying, monstrous entities, pressing against the fabric of reality itself. For that one moment, it was as if every single one of them had suddenly materialized in the room. Rizel was a paragon. He had entered a Tier 8 rift twice and a Tier 9 once. And the sheer magnitude of what he had just felt dwarfed the combined terror of those rifts. It had been overwhelming, suffocating. It made his very soul recoil. And yet, Northern had treated it as if it were nothing, as if it were normal, as if it wasn't even worth mentioning. Rizel tried to steady himself, forcing his hands into a firm fold over his chest to keep from revealing his unease. "I see," he murmured at last. A brief pause, a slow, controlled breath. Then, his eyes locked onto the shopkeeper, and with measured weight he asked, "Who are you?" The shopkeeper bowed slightly, his demeanor unwaveringly composed as he responded, "I am the Western Information Manager, Iltis." For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Then Rizel's expression shifted. A dark frown settled on his face, his brows furrowing as his eyes widened in sudden realization. A heartbeat later, his pupils contracted, his entire frame tensing as if a shockwave had just slammed into him. "Iltis, Iltis." His voice rose, laced with sheer disbelief. "You are Iltis?" Chapter 840. Elitis, Part 2. Northern and Byran seemed to be the only ones who didn't understand why everyone was freaking out. Ascendant Zion and Sage Mach stood rigid, their hands slamming onto the table. "That can't be possible. You're Elitis. How can Elitis be right here before our very eyes?" The shopkeeper, however, remained calm. He smiled, bowing slightly. "Indeed, I am Elitis, but please do not place too much meaning on it. Right now, I am merely a servant of the Void Lord." The genuine ease in his voice contrasted sharply with the stunned reactions around the room. Yet, amidst the tension, Northern could hear Revant muttering under his breath. He's been done numbers on. Trying to imagine how the shopkeeper had been revolutionized felt impossible. Whatever Revant had done, however fearsome, it was nothing short of impressive. However, who is Elitis? Northern's curiosity burned. Who was this man for Paragon Rizel to lose even a semblance of composure like that? He wasn't willing to just let it pass. His gaze shifted between Paragon Rizel, Ascendant Zion, Sage Mach, and the shopkeeper Elitis. Then he asked, "Is anyone going to explain to me who Elitis is?" Paragon Rizel froze, then turned to look at Northern. His expression tightened before he winced. "No way. You're telling me he's serving you?" And you don't even know how great of a servant you have. Northern felt a twinge of embarrassment. He scratched his cheek subtly, looking away. I didn't think to ask. He did mention he had contacts in the northern continent. Paragon Rizel shook his head powerfully. No, kid, you've got it wrong. He is the contact in the northern continent. Elitis isn't just some informant. He is an entire information network. Every piece of intelligence that circulates through the Central Plains eventually passes through him. It's like saying he's a walking library, holding limitless knowledge about almost everything. Paragon Rizel exhaled sharply before adding, "This guy is the only drifter as valuable as a paragon." Northern looked at him, eyes slightly widened. He's that impressive? So, I guess he wasn't lying when he said he has a friend everywhere. Apparently, he was the friend everywhere. Now that Northern understood the man's value, a strange feeling crept up on him, like a criminal remembering his crimes. He recalled the things he had done to the man, let alone the crueler things Revant must have done to reshape him into this respectful, uptight, and fiercely loyal servant. I'm just going to keep that a secret. He probably won't talk? Or should I threaten him? The dark thought flickered briefly in his mind, but Northern quickly pushed it away. It almost surfaced on his face, but he was too skilled at looking utterly blank while thinking the most vicious things. Ultimately, the revelation only reinforced one fact. He had fetched himself a treasure. Paragon Rizel seemed to settle down, exhaling deeply. His confidence and composure, shaken for a moment, returned in full force. If you are who you say you are, then I have no reason to worry about anything. The paragon sighed again, nodding assuredly. Elitis, however, didn't share his ease. He observed the paragon for a long moment, his expression subtly tense. Then, cautiously, he spoke. I think there might be a reason for you two. Paragon Rizel froze mid-motion as he was about to sit back in his chair. Instead, he turned to Elitis with a grave expression, leaning on the table and folding his arms. For you to say that, it must be serious. The shopkeeper nodded, and glanced at Northern before turning back to the paragon. It is. Northern understood immediately from the look in his eyes. Elitis, or whatever he was really called, couldn't remember the identity of the person who had approached him, which meant they were back to square one. Unfortunately, the shopkeeper leveled an even gaze at the paragon as he began his explanation. I was approached by a man who spoke to me about the state of Lithia. Not that I wasn't already aware, but he offered insider information. Things even I wouldn't normally have access to. Details like why you're being held here, and what's happening within the inner cadre of the government. He paused, then continued, his voice even but edged with something unreadable. He gave me the stimulants and told me to send them to Lithia at all costs. He paid a lot of money for it, and he said that if I happened to come across someone particularly interested in the blockade, I should send them there too. At that moment, Elitis glanced at Northern before quickly shifting his gaze away again, resuming his explanation. But right now, I cannot remember anything about this person. Not their face, their voice, or even the smallest hint of their identity. A heavy silence followed. Paragon Rizel's expression darkened, the weight of the situation settling visibly on him. For someone like you, that must spell doom. His voice was grim, which also means, the person who did this is no slouch. They knew exactly what they were doing when they approached you. Elitis nodded. You are right, Paragon Rizel. The paragon's brow arched sharply. I don't remember ever telling you my name, though. Elitis let out a short chuckle, inclining his head politely. Please, sir, let's not beat around the bush. As someone who claims to be the heart of intelligence, knowing the names of every paragon, not just in the Central Plains but across the world, is the bare minimum. Paragon Rizel laughed, abrupt and amused, before cutting himself off just a second later. You've really stepped into your persona, I see. He paused, his smile lingering, though his eyes seemed distant, focused on something inside rather than anything in the room. After a moment, he exhaled and said, No problem then. But someone like you must already know what to do. I refuse to believe you're entirely defenseless, clueless on how to handle a client who made you forget who they are." His tone hardened, sharp as a blade. "And given the nature of your work, and the ridiculous reputation your intelligence has, I also refuse to believe that you hadn't considered the possibility of something like this happening and prepared contingencies in advance." Northern watched Paragon Rizel, a flicker of admiration crossing his mind. The man was thorough, he liked that. Then, slowly, his gaze shifted to the shopkeeper. The entire room waited for Elias's response. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.